All right, everybody, this is Antonio Wolf, along here with good friend Hyperion, Joshua, DM, and we have someone else joining. I don't know if they want to introduce themselves or not. If they want to keep silent, we'll let them keep silent. But they're not a Hegelian, which is good, because they can ask questions relevant to the kind of things that we might say that are going to sound weird. Anyways, so I've been having this on my mind for actually a few months, and I've been telling the guys, and they know, that I've been wanting to do this kind of like roundtable talk on the concept of freedom, mainly because everything out there on YouTube is garbage. You know, it's not that I do this every day. Well, there was a time, and there's sometimes where I'm just really bored and I do it every day, but I haven't done it like in the last 5 months. It's like every few weeks I look once or twice through the YouTube algorithm, see like, has anybody posted anything new about Hegel, like lectures or whatever? And I often find that no, most people aren't posting anything new. But the people who do post, it's either like some really boring lectures, or well, they're not lectures, mostly just like presentations of papers and whatnot. And the few people who like try to say something about this stuff don't have much of a clue. So I figure there's somebody's got to say something reasonable about this, and it might as well be us. So to get this going, in a somewhat concrete fashion, there's this guy. Should I say his name? Well, nobody knows who he is, and I don't think he cares. This guy on Discord named Spirit Man, total believer in Hegel. Don't know if one would consider that a good thing or not. I tend to somewhat like the hardcore believers. And by the hardcore believers, I really mean like people and only Ken Folders. If you don't know who Ken Folders is, check him out. You can recognize him by his weird profile picture and his like 70s suits that he wears. He's a really cool guy. Very religious. He has this whole weird thing about Hegelianism being the Jedi religion of the 21st century, and it's kind of funny and it's kind of endearing at the same time.
But he's aware of the philosophy. He's not just
he's aware of he's an actual scholar. Like he's not some random Yahoo or anything. So and the stuff he has is actually quite good quality, honestly. I don't think it's the most accessible, but I think he has plenty of good stuff to say. And the main thing is like, when he's preaching his Jedi religion thing, like what he's doing, and like, what is that French term for like taking over something? Détournement, I think, is it?
Oh yeah, détournement.
Which you take something that people say like, oh well, that's or whatever, or it's bad, and like you kind of turn it around for your own thing. So he's trying to like do some kind of Trotskyite entryism into Jediism and Star Wars nerds, and like to bring them over to the side of Hegelianism.
It's hijacking nerddom for.
Which hasn't worked as far as I can tell.
No.
But whenever he taught, he actually taught classes on this, titled on this, at whatever university he teaches at. And they always got pat because like, who wouldn't go like, somebody's teaching a class on Jedi religion? What? I would take it. But I don't think he's converted very many people, if any at all. But I salute his efforts. Anyway, Spirit Man is kind of a religious person towards Hegel in this manner. Except he's not a scholar, and he's nowhere as well read or interesting. But I bring him up because we've had discussions with him, too many discussions really, in which the great disagreement, and I don't think this is a disagreement, I just think he's wrong. And I'm going to make that stronger. I don't think he's wrong, he is wrong. It's not just my opinion, it's not just like, well, if you think it in some other way, he's right. No, he's wrong. He misreads Hegel as requiring us all to commit that if we understand his philosophy, we should all commit to fixing everything in the world immediately. So, he has, I can say I will give him respect for this, and that which like he's seriously committed to trying to change the world on the big scale. He has this whole organization called like WIWA, like World Something Workers application, and he's trying to make this application in which like it does everything. It'll teach you dialectics, it'll teach you Hegel, and it'll be catered just exactly for your kind of personality and your jobs, and it'll be a way for you to network, and it'll be a substitute for Uber, and it'll be a substitute for all these other things, and it'll also be the substitute for your union, and it'll also be the substitute for your church. He wants to do everything, and he will not stop proselytizing everywhere you invite him to and whoever you introduce him to. Although he does understand limits, once you tell him like, please shut up, I don't care, he will actually do that. It took me a while, like about like 12 hours of like back and forth with him until I finally got tired, and I told him like, please shut up, I don't care, and he has actually kept to that. But the discussions we've had, like the main misunderstanding he has is that he thinks that freedom is this commitment in which there is one form of freedom, meaning that we all have to commit to these great world-changing things, because that's, if we were all fully enlightened Hegel understanders, we would realize that our freedom is in trying to save everyone. It's like the Christian mission. We got to save every soul, by force if we have to. And by force, I mean it's not violence, but it's kind of annoying kind of force. The kind of Christians that come to your door every Sunday, and except if they could do it every day, they would do it every day, on the clock, on the dot, until you just kind of went, what, you're right, I love Jesus, praise the Lord. Well, that's not going to happen. And I think that like that gets to the core, like that's the background story. But the core of the issue is Spirit thinks there's only one conclusion necessary to the concept of freedom, or rather the idea of freedom, concerning what we ought to do. And that's clearly bonkers by the Hegelian standards. And here's why. Okay, to put it in really basic abstract terms, and abstract not in the Hegelian sense, but abstract in the everyday sense, which is the Hegelian sense, but you might think of it more concretely. Freedom is self-determination. The explanation Hegel gives as to how this is this giant book called The Science of Logic. By the point you get to the concept of freedom, which is not really treated under the name of freedom, it's treated under the name of the concept. You've gone over about 450 pages of a brutal development of concept to concept to concept to concept, in which you've gone from understanding the world as being, as qualities, as infinity, as quantities, as measures, as essences, actualities, substances. And this leads you to a certain kind of understanding at the cusp of what is called the concept of a self-reflexive, self-acting action, a reciprocity, which is, if you want to think about it in a physics sense, there's, I forget which law this is from Newton's laws of forces of motion, which he says, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And this isn't some kind of thing that takes time to happen.
That's Newton's third law of motion.
Yeah, third law of motion.
Thank you for that. My ignorant mind hasn't thought about that in like 10 years. So I used to be a big physics nerd, and I've forgotten most of it, because once you get into philosophy, you're like, physics, who cares? Anyways, that reaction is not like some kind of like cause and effect where like there is my action and then your reaction. No, the action reaction is at the same time in the same moment. Insofar as this body makes contact with another body that body, as at the same time, makes contact with this body, the reaction is instant. In the same way, cause and effects are a mutual cause and effect. I mean, quite literally. I mean, to put it here in the conceptual form of it is, a cause is a cause insofar as it has an effect. Cause causes an effect. If there were no effect, there would be no cause. A cause is the condition of the effect. That's what makes it a cause as opposed to an effect. The effect is the condition, the cause is the condition. But if the cause is a cause only because there is an effect, if there is no effect, there is no cause, then the effect conditions cause. Therefore, the conditioned conditions its condition. Therefore, the condition becomes conditioned, and the conditioned becomes the condition. And therefore, the cause is the effect of the effect, and the effect is the cause of the cause. This happens not in some kind of temporal thing of first it's a cause and it's an effect. No, it's immediately a cause-effect. That's reciprocity. The reciprocity of it. Freedom functions in this way for Hegel, in which freedom is this self-determination, whereas in the logics of essence, so-called, you have a condition and a conditioned, where there's a logical priority to the condition, and there's a secondary, positiveness, it's put forth by the condition of the effect, for example. In freedom, there can be no such thing. There is nothing that is external to freedom which conditions it. It is not conditioned. It conditions. But it conditions what? Freedom is not in a world in which there is anything else but it. If there was anything else upon it which would impinge on it, it would condition it. If there was anything else upon it which would restrict it, it would be conditioned, therefore to be unfree. So freedom in the logical sense has to be absolute. But if it's absolute, it has no relationship to anything else, and the only thing to relate to is to itself. So freedom has to be a self-determination, a self-causation, a self-effect. In the regular ways that we think about it, in common sense understanding, as well as even formal, rigorous, logical understanding of the formal kind, something like self-determination is nonsense. It's just unthinkable, because on the meaning sense, which is the only sense we care about here with concepts, you have that relationship in which a cause is an effect and an effect is a cause. Well, this kind of undermines the whole distinction that we're trying to make of, like a cause is the primary reality, an effect is the secondary reality. And Hegel undermines that by saying, well, no, these are kind of mutual, codependent, codetermining realities, and they're actually form one reality themselves because they can only be distinguished insofar as they share a reality in which they are contained and in which, they share a logical space, so to say. So, it's this logical space which brings them together and which also is the one that divides them, which is the space of freedom. So freedom has this form of self-reflexivity, self-determination. One way to cash this out, which is very abstract, but let's go with it anyways, is the universal, the concept. And Hegel divides the concept into universal, particular, individual. Those are universal, particular, the moments. Individual is the concrete universal. Where Hegel says, okay, fine, the universal is the all of everything. It's the unity which contains all, has nothing outside of itself, is infinite, blah, blah, blah. And he says, well, but if it is the universal, it is distinguished amongst its parts. Its parts are the particulars. I mean, quite literally, it's in the word. Parts, particulars. If we make this distinction logically, which we do, the universal is universal precisely because it contains its particulars, it overbears upon them, it determines them. But is distinguished as the universal, the whole, from the parts. If you do that, however, the whole, which is supposed to be the all of everything, is not in fact the all of everything because it makes a distinction between itself and the parts, and therefore the whole itself becomes a part against the parts. This is particularity. If you make that move, you say, well, there is no real universal as a whole then. The whole is just the parts. It's like nominalism, we could say. And I say Hegel makes a sort of further move and says, well, there's a further intelligibility to these parts, in which, like, it's not just a part, because if it was just like a part, then there would just be one part. Part of what? Well, if it was just a part, or like particularity as such, particularity of what? There's apple, an apple. What is the difference? You're specifying a difference, but it's not a difference. You could say, well, you're specifying some kind of a set of indifferent particularities. We can't call them individuals yet. They're not specified in any way other than, they're all particulars. One particular is as good as another. One, you could say like one atom of gold is just like any other atom of gold. A rose is a rose by any other name. This or that. That's a logical particularity where the difference is a difference that does not matter. So the particular has a universal element to it, in which, like, if we didn't already have the knowledge that we went through the universal and got straight to the particular, because the universal is a universal over its parts, therefore it becomes a part against the parts, therefore particularity is what overbears upon it. We've done that, so we can't return to that. And Hegel says, well, the further intelligibility is that the particulars are particulars among themselves. Not only are they parted against the whole, but even if we find the whole as a part against the parts, this part is not that part. You got apple, universal, and apple, the particular, and you have this apple or that apple, the individual apple, which would be the mutual relationship between this part as opposed to that part. But the understanding of the individual is that this individual is an individual only in this matrix of relationships to other particulars, in a negatively positive way and also a positively negative way. Because if these other particulars did not exist, then that individual particular itself would not exist. It would not be a particular of any kind. It would just be, it would have no distinguishing characteristics. It would not be distinct. It would be indeterminate. So it would just be a whole lot of nothing. When you get that individual specified, in which, like, logically it contains a distinction from the particulars, this individual then unifies the different particulars immanently as a positive relationship within itself, and logically it becomes once again the all of everything. It becomes the universal, but it is not the universal as it began, where it's just like the abstract universal, which then is only specified as a part against its parts. But now it's the concrete universal, which specifies its positive being as a part against the parts as an individual. That's what the concrete universal is. Now that's a lot to follow abstractly, but that is the quick version of the robust explanation of what self-determination is. To give you a sort of like further visualization, one may say, is think of an organism. Actually, this comes later in the science of logic as well. Self-determination concerns the fact that the universal spreads into determines itself into the particulars determine themselves into individuals, and these individuals reunite the particularities back into a universal oneness. Living organisms can be said to have this form, in which, obviously, say, for example, I love dogs, so let me use dogs. You have the dog species, the universal. But obviously, the dog has to exist. There's no such ethereal thing as the dog species. We're not the caricature of Platonism here. And I say caricature because it's not at all obvious or clear that Plato ever bought into this thing that people impute to him about there's ideas somewhere else. That seems to be just a gross misreading of things. So the universal here as a species, say the dog species, does not exist, some kind of ethereal space. If it exists as a dog. Rather, let's start concretely, the dog, like this dog. I had a fat dog. If you've seen my videos, you can see him. He's on my channel. Unfortunately, passed away. But, say that dog. Well, that dog obviously exists concretely. To exist concretely is to exist in a determinate relationship. Determinate relationships are distinctions between, something and other. That something other distinction involves, a distinction that is not a distinction because the other is also a something, and the something is also the other. So, there's a dog and there's a plurality of dogs. The existent dog has to be many dogs. Well, there's a further distinction there. Let's not get into the details as to how or why this happens on the more specific levels of biology, in which, dogs are divided into sexes. There's a male and a female. They live their doggy lives. They're born as, they're born, they develop as pups. They spend time with their parents. They form little packs. They do their doggy things. They have doggy sex. They have more puppies, and, they do their own thing. They keep on and they die. This creates a cycle in which individuals multiply as a plurality into particulars, and particular individuals, and come back together to reunify the species in the act of sexual reproduction, which keeps the existence of the universal process of the species going. To understand the concept of the dog, what it is to understand what the dog in its own independent reality is. And in its own independent reality, as a dog, the dog originates from dogs. It's born from a dog mom with a dog dad used for sperm and all that genetic material. They have a dog life. They develop and grow. There's multiple dogs born all the time. They're different sexes. There's probably some parity between, I don't know what this. We assume it's always 50-50. 50 male, 50% male, 50% female somehow. But this keeps a process of one part of the dog or one moment of the existence of dogs to another moment of the existence of dogs to another moment of the existence of dogs until the whole process just keeps going and going and going. This whole process, which is just an endless process of dogs making more dogs to make more dogs to live dog lives, to do doggy things. That whole process is has an absolute structure. If you look at it, if all conditions are given, if dogs always have food, the world doesn't end. The sun doesn't get too hot. They don't lack water. All these other things. Predators don't exist. Disease doesn't kill them completely. The dog species is immortal. It is an infinite, universal, to a large extent, self-subsisting reality, which determines itself. The dog is the dog on account of its own nature, not on account of what something else determines it to be. Certainly, we, for example, have bred dogs in certain ways. We've determined what they are. It wasn't just an internal determination of themselves. We've conditioned them in certain ways to guide them to a development that we want. But, assuming that all that away, the dog species in general would maintain itself as just this endless loop of multiplying and reunifying self-determination of the dog as the dog species into individual dogs, blah, blah. That would be the dog, put logically speaking, as free on its own account. It would be a self-determination. It is what it is on its own account, more than less. A dog is kind of a bad example because it's not a fully free entity, but it's certainly freer than, say, the plants around it. It's certainly freer than the dirt around it, than the stellar bodies.
I could say it's more free than like a clam or something.
It's definitely more free than a clown.
Clam.
I know.
Oh, clown, yeah.
I know you said clown. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Right. And I mean, that's a good thing you brought up. So part of what we mean by self-determination is how does a thing keep itself being a thing, and to what degrees can it act as a thing that it is? Saying a thing here is kind of like objectivizing it too much, because part of freedom is that freedom is subjective. The dog is, for example, or the clam here would be a subject insofar as it is the origin of the process of its being the thing that it is. In this sense,
it's not the freedom of the clam to walk around and eat things.
Yeah, and so what is it? A clam, for example, probably doesn't feel unfree in not being able to walk around on land. it can't, well, who knows if they're really that conscious to begin. Well, they are conscious to a certain extent, but it's not a consciousness that I can say I feel much for, or that can feel much itself. So, a clam being a clam is free in what it is. It doesn't feel trapped in anything. A dog being a dog doesn't feel trapped in any way. Being what it is, without overbearing conditions. Certainly, if you put a dog in a cage, for example, the dog certainly feels unfree. Why? Because, its natural desire is to roam around. And naturally speaking, it would just roam around. Be able to, that's why it has legs, it's to walk around, that's why it runs, it's hunts, all these other things. If you put a dog in a cage and you don't allow it to do those things, certainly the dog will not feel its own freedom, because it has barriers imposed upon it. To the extent that a dog can't overcome those barriers, it certainly is free. But this sense of subjectivity of it is a self-determination, or being oneself, the origin of the process of determination of what one is and how one is. You can also give this over to something like gold, atomic gold. What makes the atom of gold what it is? Well, certainly whatever processes are internal to it that constitute it into the kind of being that it is. We don't even comprehend how they operate. We have all these weird physical taxonomic theories, but they're not really explicatory theories. So we don't really understand what atoms are in a full sense, or rather in a proper conceptual sense. But if we understood it, we would grasp the same kind of developments, say like the dog, in which we would grasp the self-constitution of elements in this manner. And certainly, I think that they do, and they must have some kind of self-constituting power. They exist. Once they exist, they seem to resist being made otherwise. You have to put a lot of pressure and force on something just to crack an atom. That's why inventing atom bombs is no easy thing, and you can only do it with unstable elements. If you have stable elements, good luck cracking an atom. If you could, probably blow up the universe. Actually, no. I think I read something that if you could crack an electron, I think that would literally create so much energy that theoretically that it would blow up the universe. Ilyenkov would be proud.
Negative. Ilyenkov, yeah.
Yeah, Ilyenkov.
Oh, that's unconfirmed, though. We don't know that.
Yeah, we don't know. That's just pure theory bullshit. So another thing, I think if you could if the electron had components, for example, theoretically speaking, if you could crack it, the theoretical particles that compose an electron would speed from here to Andromeda in 2 seconds. That's a lot of distance to cover. That's faster than light.
Should we take calls or? Hello?
Hello.
I don't know. I think AW cut out. I don't know.
Oh.
It's just commenting on the dead air. Good thing we're not live.
He's being silenced.
Or he's silencing himself.
Testing. Test.
You're back, yeah.
All right.
And we're back.
Yeah, and we're back. How long was I gone?
About 30 seconds.
Okay, that's not too bad.
I didn't calculate.
I was just mentioning, welcome, Rain. We're talking about freedom.
Cool.
And
I was giving the dog example. I don't know, maybe I'll see if I can put some visuals on that. Because it's the example of a cycle of living things is as visual an example as one could put it.
I think the way I kind of conceptualize it in my mind, the way I understand it, is it's the totality of a process.
Yeah, it has to be a fully self-enclosed process. If there's anything outside it, then it can't be free because it's being determined by something else. So the point is like
free to the degree that the conditions it encounters arise from it.
Exactly. And so the example of like the dog species thing is that like the dog as dog, far more than less, determines itself as the thing that it is according to its own internal nature. It's not something that's imposed upon it by the outside. The genetic process, the DNA, the living dog, all of it, arises from this entity, which, in the course of investigations, we could see as this whole species of a gigantic process of production and self-production of the dogs as dogs. Dogs come from dogs to make dogs, to live dog lives, to do dog things. And the cycle is an endless repeating process in which the absolute self-determination belongs to the species, not to the individuals. But the individuals have their own moments of, being the point and purpose of the process. So, not to be misunderstood here. Freedom involves a process in which there's something beyond the individual, or at least a particular individual, which is its purpose, but it's also its purposeful cause, but also the individual is likewise the purposeful cause of that thing. And so that thing is not something external to it. Like we as human beings, for example, the kind of beings that we are, some people certainly feel this way. There's certainly troubled minds in which like they feel that our human being is some kind of limitation rather than enabling thing. So they feel that the body is a jail. They feel that cognition is a jail. They feel that reason is a jail. And for them, freedom, they think, is just this freedom to do anything without cause, without conditions, without limitations. Hegel calls this abstract freedom. And this is tied to the will. Now we're getting to the proper conception of freedom as a lived human reality, so to say. In which Hegel calls this abstract will, abstract freedom. These are all the same, mainly because as far as we're human beings, we are thinking beings, we are purposeful beings. We cannot talk about freedom as something beyond our will or other to our will. Our will is part of our freedom. And there's times in which our wills, for example, come into opposition with a lot of things that don't make sense. Sometimes if you really want to fly, for example, but you don't have the ingenuity to create an airplane, you certainly feel like, oh wow, being a human sucks. It's like, it wouldn't be better if I could be a bird. Although I think some people kind of believe that, and those people are wrong because birds don't have hands, and hands are very useful. That's why crows aren't self-conscious, Rain.
Yeah.
Burgeoning, damn it.
So we want to be Icarus instead.
No, I'm referencing this talk we had. What was it? It was like about 3 weeks ago.
That crows might be self-conscious.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, that was like about almost a month ago, I think. It was a good discussion.
They don't want to be birds; they want to be Icarus. But...
Oh yeah. Well, just strap them on a rocket. A V2.
Has to come with all those qualifications to meet their true free will.
The story of Icarus goes that Icarus flew too close to the sun, and that he had absolutely no problems with that. And he made himself independent.
Alright. You know what you're going for.
Yeah. Going back anyways, okay, so this is a good point to to come in, Rain. The whole problem of abstract freedom is actually it's the general way we think about freedom nowadays. This is like why the whole free will thing happens in philosophy, which is stupid, in which we conceive of freedom as this notion that freedom is that which has no limitation, and so we have those people who like are against all determination. Like there's so-called libertarianism, which is the idea that we are radically free beings, and that this means that somehow we have a spontaneous capacity to determine our actions, our will, blah blah blah, and that we cannot impute this to some kind of determining factor outside of us, whatever that means, be it some kind of physical, chemical, psychological, blah blah blah, in which we would say, oh, that is the cause of why I have decided to do something. Something else causes my will. So libertarians deny that, rightfully, because it's a dehumanizing thing. It turns us into a mere object, another billiard ball on the table of physics. But the solution they have is really no solution, because no libertarian account ever gets anywhere to a point where it means anything, at least not that I've ever encountered. Because they're stuck with this issue of like, what do we even mean? What can we say? Like when there's some kind of mysterious mechanism, well, they can't even call it a mechanism because it can't be a mechanism, right? It's literally against the logic of mechanism. To try to get the onus of responsibility as a self-determination to us. Likewise, the determinists then deny this and say, well, that's nonsense. How can there be freedom? Like we're physical beings. There's clearly certain things cause us to do things. Why can't we then say neurons cause this or that, or some kind of unconscious causes this or that? And as far as rationalism goes, the rational position is determinism, because it's the only one that's actually intelligible of the two. Libertarianism offers this thing in which we're supposed to be free, but nobody knows what that means, because to radically de-link ourselves from any kind of external determination without any notion of originary self-determination, because that too we cannot enter, because that would be, if our nature was given, for example, they would say, well, then we're not free because we're just following our nature. Our nature has already been pre-given, and therefore it's structuring the ways in which we do this or that. Therefore, we can't have these kind of like pre-given nature for, being anything. And that's the problem of like this abstract notion of free will, or freedom as such, in which we can't have anything given, but having nothing given, we don't know what it is that's supposed to result. Because otherwise you have these issues. People say like, oh, well, if determinism is denies free will or freedom, then surely its opposite, a radical indeterminism, must allow for it. And obviously there's a issue immediately with that, where no, if you have a chain of causal relations of any kind, be they material, psychological, or whatever, conceptual even, and that locks you into a certain kind of conclusion no matter what. And if you get rid of that and you just put yourself in a radical void and something happens, you can't give any intelligible reason for why anything happened. You can't even attribute that to yourself, because then somebody asks, well, why'd you do that? And you're like, well, I just did it. Well, okay, like, what gives you any responsibility to do it? You might as well just say, well, it just happened. You can't give an explanation to that, neither to yourself nor on any emotional, psychological, or rational basis. So you can't call that freedom either. So these two things are abstractions. There's also, the cop-out, which is compatibilism, which has an intuition that yes, it's true, in which like freedom's got to be more concrete than that. We can't think about this in this weird notion of a radical abstraction. But it gives up the entire notion of a fully self-determining internal freedom, because it has no notion of absoluteness, particularly because it's mostly an analytic delusion. often hung up on materialism, physicalism, in which, they're like, well, it's just a good enough definition, like it's pragmatic, God, hate that word, pragmatic. It's how they weasel out of giving you an explanation all the time. Well, it's pragmatic. Pragmatic according to what? What's pragmatic about pragmatism?
Like, why is something useful?
Yeah, they just kind of, they say, well, it's more pragmatic based on...
It's more useful.
It's just basically saying, look, it is.
But it's more useful. Like, this thing...
They presuppose something other than truth as what they're trying to do. And so,
according to the pragmatic theory of truth, utility is truth. Like, there's no difference between the two.
Yeah, and that's a whole load of nonsense. Because then that itself isn't just a utility thing. That's it's the whole skeptical dilemma, right? You're saying there's no knowledge, but here you are making a knowledge claim.
There also can be a major problem with utility as a maxim, right? Like, if you're gonna say that the two are equivalent, but like, you're gonna, as a pragmatic maxim base, say, okay, well, we should only pursue what's useful. Then what you're effectively doing is you're not pursuing something that may not seem to be useful at the moment, but could be useful down the line, right? So it's kind of a failure in it too.
Yeah, many such cases.
Pragmatism is not a philosophy. I'm just going to straight out say it. It's not philosophy. Anybody who says, like, oh, I'm a pragmatist, that's a good sign for me to just ignore whatever they're about to say.
Oh, you're a subjective dumbass.
Yeah, you might as well say, I'm a subjectivist, I'm a relativist. Okay, well.
Yeah, okay, cool. Go relatively far away from me.
Anyway, let's go back to the issue of freedom. All right, so the main problem of abstract freedom is precisely this, we can't specify what it is that we're free in a positive sense, and the negative sense only sneaks in this positive sense, which is left forever undefined. And this is the way in which we do think of freedom, by and large, in the modern world. Most people think, like, well, I'm unfree because there's these kind of external barriers to me. And what is freedom to me? Well, freedom is that, concretely speaking, I have certain desires, I have a certain kind of will, I want to do certain things, but here are these barriers that allow me, or don't allow me to do what I want. That is unfreedom. It's a kind of like closely compatibilist notion. They don't think about freedom in a positive sense of, like, I am the origin and cause and self-determination of myself. Because it's all fine and dandy to have desires and a will to do anything. But then there's plenty of things that people desire and want to do, which are just plainly not, unproductive for them, harmful even for them, and which self-ignorance causes people to pursue in a mistaken notion that this is freedom. And I think, like, there's some trivial examples we can give of this, of various kinds. An addict, for example, certainly has desires. Their desires to, engage in whatever activity they have, be it, people use alcohol, drugs, or whatever. And they're like, oh, I was like, and somebody says, like, God, you're not living a very good life, you're not free. And they're like, yeah, fuck you. Yes, I am free. I want to be doing this. I want to be, drinking booze and having hangovers, blacking out every night.
My freedom, damn it.
Yeah, it's my freedom, damn it.
That's what Rick Roderick said.
Yeah. And this person, certainly might even be enjoying that life. They might. I don't deny that. That's a possibility. They are still unfree. Because on a deeper level, you can understand how this person is engaging in self-destruction, how this person is wasting their life away, how this person isn't developing as a personality, how this person isn't doing all these other things which would if they were to comprehend the level of damage and lost possibilities that they're engaging in.
We're talking about unrelenting, unmoderated, unmediated by reason, just, getting wasted every day doing nothing else.
Yeah, and
not having a drink or, drinking.
Yeah, and that's certainly just one example. There's plenty of examples in which people... The whole thing is that enjoying yourself, having things that you want to do, is not itself the mark of freedom. Because you might have things that are actually quite unfree. Let's get extreme. Actually, no, never mind. YouTube has a second... I actually, the YouTube algorithm has gotten so bad that there's so many things that were trivial that people could say, and you can't even say it anymore. It's ridiculous, but I'm not even going to... Okay, fine.
Let me see an example of Soma from Brave New World or something.
Well, the example... The whole thing is that there's desires people that people have that are bad. Like, for example, okay, fine. There's some people who are just, naturally brutal. People want to believe we're all socialized. Or there's some people who just have anger issues by nature, their temperament's that way, and they enjoy violence. It is what it is. Now that person says, look, my freedom is I like to inflict pain. Nobody taught me that, and indeed, if you look at a lot of these people who become serial killers, nobody teaches them to be violent. They just fucking. Or
even on a bully level, like that guy from Friday, Tiny or whatever his name is.
Yeah. But the point is, this person would see their freedom as being able to engage those urges, because freedom is my being able to actualize my will and desire, and desire is what I want, and what I want is to inflict pain and blah blah blah. Okay. Now, logically speaking, if you were to take that to its logical conclusion of an absoluteness, put it in the Kantian paradigm of let's universalize the maximum for a second. If everybody was exacting extreme sadistic violence upon each other, society would fall apart, and this person would not be having a good time because they'd be dead before too long, and so would everybody else. It would lead to a self-destruction. Now maybe this person even wants to self-destruct. Now if you want to self-destruct, but you're an existent being, clearly the point of nature is not to create beings that come into being, exist, and just want to destroy themselves. That doesn't, whatever that is created that way, not that there doesn't happen to be beings that do that, would erase itself from being just like that. It would not subsist. It would not have any, substance to it in the end. So, if something like that happened, fine, okay, sure, contingency of nature. But such a thing is quite literally stupid. It's also it's incoherent with itself. It's not able to determine itself because, it does not come about as a universal reflection and say, gee, why do I want to, harm others and harm myself and lead myself to this universal self-destruction? Does that even make sense? Is that a sensible thing? Let's forget about Schopenhauer. Believing that the idea is, let's just destroy our species, antinatalism. When you really think about that, how nonsensical that is. That there could be a will, God in, as Schopenhauer calls it, the will, which seems to be this self-destructive being that brings itself into existence and only experiences this endless cycle of pain, dotted with, these little moments of pleasure, but the vast majority of it is pain. And that, when it became self-conscious, all it wanted to do was just annihilate itself. What sense does that have? How is that rational in a proper sense? And Hegel would say that it isn't rational in a proper sense. It's something that, in the moment, logically speaking, in the moment that it came to be, it would just immediately be gone. It would just annihilate itself. It would be nothing. It wouldn't be rational because it literally would destroy its own partedness. It would destroy its own distinguishedness, its own existence. And irrational here is like ratio, in that sense of a distinction or standing distinction, substantive distinction that endures, something that can maintain itself into being. That's rational. In order to have that kind of rationality, you have to have the structure of a self-determining freedom, which maintains itself as individuals, rationalizes itself, literally parts itself as these individuals. These individuals then maintain themselves as this flowing process of a universal unity of shifting from one determination to another determination, or accruing more determinations to themselves, in which this process of distinction, differentiation, does not lead to the dissolution of the distinction or differentiation, such that it was all for nothing. The rational maintains itself as rational. It maintains itself as distinct and individual within the universal process in which its own existence and being flows. I don't know. You got anything to say about that, Rain?
That was great. I was just thinking about the addict thing. Regarding the addict thing. I guess right. So there's the issue of desire, and a desire that is incoherent or incommensurable with universality encounters universality as something that is a limit upon itself, like something antagonistic to itself. So in just pursuing natural desires, the world becomes antagonistic because there's nothing essential to the desire that makes it congruent with the way the rest of the world works. And in the case of addiction and stuff like that, because of its self-destructiveness, it's also incongruent with oneself.
Exactly. God, thank you for bringing that back up, because that's why I wanted you here. See, that's a perfect example of the explanation of what I was going for, in which, like, that's the problem of these immediate desires. Sure, you can have your immediate desires, but there's plenty of desires that we have that literally are incongruent, incoherent with our unity as an existent being on various levels. Addiction will destroy you. It's one part of you that goes against the entire unity of the being that you are. That can't be free. How can freedom lead to your self-destruction? Logically, as far as Hegel shows in the Science of Logic, and I can't go into obviously the details of that here. Hegel purports to show that freedom has to be this free, self-determining thing which remains substantive, enduring through its various determinations. You as a human being are free as a human being insofar as your bodily determinations are coherent with your rational willing and your self-preservation of various ways. Your psychological determinations are coherent with the maintenance and subsistence of you as an individual free being, and your rational coherence is then also in unity with your totality of you being an individual free being. Because if anything goes awry, if something gets too far gone in one direction, it will destroy you. And that cannot be the end of that can't be the end purpose of existence, because then we would not exist in the first place. It's like that kind of thing is quite literally on an ontological level a reductio ad absurdum of itself. If Schopenhauer was right, then existence would not exist just as immediately if it ever did. It's quite literally a logical contradiction that brings itself to nothing.
I almost see this stuff as like errors in a process. I don't know if that's a good way to think of it, though.
something interesting that I've been thinking about lately is it's almost like I like to think almost of, or like this is one way in which I like to think about freedom and self-determination
Test. Test.
As almost like a degree of coherence.
Test.
Like from, oh, hello.
Yeah.
Okay, you got it.
Almost like degrees of coherence, where what is maximally coherent is what is maximally self-determining, absolutely self-determining, where what is implied from it coheres with what it is, and so it sustains itself absolutely always everywhere, basically. Whereas what is minimally is that which is what it implies is most self-annulling. And that the interesting thing is that there should be degrees between this maximum and this minimum, so to speak.
Yes, like with Hegel, like we have to deal with the absolutes. Everything is dealt with in absoluteness, because if you don't deal with it in absoluteness, then you're always dealing with conditionals, and conditionals are infinite, and you'll never really get at the core of what you want to get. So if you want definite answers, answers with an actual singular end, that can be clearly grasped, it has to be an absolute form of inquiry into the absolute itself. So freedom is not some kind of like partial freedom, like the freedom of a human being. No, it's freedom as such. Freedom as such cannot have any bounds. Freedom as such cannot have any this is not just only like in a natural space-temporal existential bound, but a conceptual bound itself. Freedom has no conceptual bounds. There's no category, so there's no reason outside of freedom. Freedom itself is reasoning. There is no reason which bounds it. It is the reason that bounds. So somebody say that enjoys being an alcoholic, whatever that means, and I think that it's kind of generally well-known thing that anyone who claims that they enjoy being alcoholic is a liar. They're very deeply disturbed people, and they are very well aware of it. They try to hide it. But those people do they share in a level of freedom? Absolutely. Like certainly, they're freer than plants. They're freer than a dog. They're freer than, say, a 1-year-old. But are they? How free they are? Hegel gives us a way in which we can measure freedom on a gradient scale. It's not either or. It's not like, well, you're either free or you're not. No, everything's got some measure of freedom. Everything's got some measure of self-determination. Hegel says even in the most radical kind of like slavery, there's still a measure of freedom which is impossible to take away from you.
Frederick Douglass, he wouldn't have been able to do what he did otherwise.
Yeah. There's also Epictetus.
This is one of the things that's kind of counterintuitive about Hegel, but for Hegel, the more conditions, in a sense, that are required for you to be actually, it's like the freer you are, in a sense, where it's like for me to be, I imply an atmosphere, I imply sunlight, I imply earth, I imply electromagnetic process, or a magnetic process around the earth, I imply a biosphere, I imply society. Like, in order for me to be the kind of self I am, I imply an enormous totality of things that precede me.
It's because
that's so far as I am coherent with all that I imply, that I encounter my freedom in that totality.
I was just gonna say, it's because the more stuff that's there supports the process, so you can just do more.
Yeah.
Like, the sense is, I'm not restricted. Like, I require sunlight, but I am not just sunlight. Sunlight is something I appropriate in order to be what I am, so I can see and navigate. Just like I appropriate gravity so I can be tethered to the earth, but at the same time I can lift myself up and walk around. So these things are implied in me, but they do not. They are enabling conditions that I, in order to be the thing I am, imply without being reduced to them, because I wield them towards my own self.
Yeah. Well, it's like, what could you do in a void? I mean, you can't do much of anything in a void.
Yeah, it's like how you can't have a video game if they don't program obstacles.
I mean, you don't have anything to do, so it's just...
Yeah. So this brings it back to the beginning of this, like the issue of the abstract freedom. That abstract freedom misunderstands that, it thinks that freedom is freedom from determinations, freedom from conditions, and Hegel inverts that and says no. The more conditions are, you're right, the more conditions required, the more conditions internal to you, which means the more power of determination you have over things. People don't understand. They think, oh, like I'm subject to gravity. They don't understand how they, as an organism, subject gravity itself as a part of the organism, so that gravity works for us, in a positive way, as an enabling condition rather than an externally determining condition. Likewise, they think like, oh, well, if only we had, if only we weren't limited by our brains, for example. There's the people who have the idea that the brain is some kind of limiting thing. Maybe not. But regardless of that, were we not to have this condition of the brain for them? Actually, yeah, let's go all the way with this example. Suppose that, this actually comes from the Hindu and Buddhist views, where, okay, there's the one universal mind, Brahman, or you could call it also just the, what is it called? Nirvana, everything, all those kind of things, in which, fine, okay, God is consciousness, blah, blah, blah. And, God is conscious of everything at once. God's just like already, always in bliss, and God is eternal, beyond time, beyond space, blah, blah, blah. And, if God has experience, if we dare to call it experience, what is it? It's just a cacophony. It's not some kind of like beautiful harmony. It's just a cacophony of existence. It's just like noise, indeterminate noise. What can God focus on? Nothing. God just focuses on everything. What does God look at? Nothing, because God looks upon everything. Everything's just immediately there, just there. In order for the world to start appearing as the world, for example, and actually, before we step into that, what Brahman would see is not, say, like colors and shapes of flowers or whatever. Brahman would see the essence of things, but the essence of things is what everything's made out of Brahman. It'd be like seeing. Imagine if what you saw was the atoms that made everything, right?
Yeah, just the particles.
You would literally everything would be opaque, because everything is atoms.
I mean, it's a reduction of your sight in that, you're just effectively seeing numerals of the same thing over and over again. There really isn't
because you don't distinguish it.
Yeah, it's exactly.
So, if we think of the brain as the limiter which starts to part the world to distinguish things, if you take that example, I think the brain is not some kind of bad thing, and there are some Eastern views that view it this way, in which human existence isn't some bad thing that limits you. It's what allows you to have a perspective at all, because the absolute, the Brahman, the God, whatever you want to call it, in its abstract doesn't have a perspective at all. It doesn't see anything. It doesn't experience anything, because it just experiences itself abstractly, because it is the essence of everything. It just experiences its essence.
In a way, you could say that because of this, Hegelianism is very, very humanistic.
Yeah, it is. So having these limitations is what it enables you to experience a world in the first place. It's what allows you to experience. Like what you said about video games, Rain, that you can't make a video game without obstacles. Then what do? You just walk around, I guess. Walk around and do what? Nothing. There's nothing to do. There's nothing specified. There's nothing determinate. when things are determinate, they have differences. It's those differences that give you the beginning of distinctions, which allow you to make meaningful choices in the first place. So, people are like, oh, if only we weren't limited to this singular, consciousness of ours, if only, wouldn't it be great if I knew everything in your mind, if we were telepathic and we could just intuit everything in each other's minds. That certainly would be a kind of relationship that has a freeing element, but there's also an unfree element, which would be the freeing elements which are lacked by us, for example. Imagine if whenever you met somebody, just by the sight of, say, the aura, whatever. By the way, Steiner claimed that he could do this. Rudolf Steiner claimed that he could do this, that he could see the auras of people and he could always tell that if they were lying or not. Imagine if you had that, and you knew that whenever people were lying to you. The very notion of trust would just not exist. Because you could tell immediately, oh well, you wanted to go hang out with your friend, and you're like, do you want to do this? And I'm kind of busy, got something to do. Like, okay. And then
no, you're not. You're just gonna sit home and play video games.
And instead you just intuited what they really felt, which is like, what? I just don't feel like hanging out with you, man. Like, you kind of annoy me. It'd be kind of a shitty world. Not gonna lie. Now some people would prefer that.
I don't know. I mean, okay, I would rather know if someone doesn't want to hang out than for them to lie,
But if it's not consequential,
I think
Josh,
it frees me in that, if I know more of the full situation, I'm able to more accurately reflect my will in the world if I know what the world is.
Yeah,
if I'm deceived about what the world is, I'm not fully free. I'm limited in a way.
Well, no, but there is a freedom in just being able to shirk off and project an externality, which is inessential, which has nothing to do with it, and it's not some great big deal to you, it's not some great big deal to me, and just rub off like oil superficially and just move on and not have to deal with that because it's not really a problem. You know what I mean?
That's not practically how everyone approaches the subject, though. If you were to say, oh, I don't want to hang out with you, sorry, they'd get mad. Usually.
Well, exactly, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes you don't want to get into that.
That's not how I would react.
You wouldn't.
I don't think that's how,
which is borderline sociopathic, but yeah.
Okay.
And you didn't care that much about hanging out
I don't know.
to begin with, so it doesn't matter that much to you.
Yeah, Josh, if me saying no when you ask to hang out and you're not hurt, I'm hurt about that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm hurt, but I'm less hurt than if you lied about it. If you said, oh, I'm busy, and then I found out you're not busy. That's a bigger problem.
Everyone's
in my
busy.
World.
Business.
No, but
Yeah, I know what you mean. If it's not a priority, you feel like the priority is not justified.
Yes, if you were dishonest about your intentions, I have much more respect for honesty, even if maybe it's a little hurtful. It's oh, AW doesn't want to hang out with me, but at least.
Sure.
But it's my freedom to lie.
It's not.
It is. If I want to spare someone's feelings, and lying, you believing the lie makes you unfree, but
but me being unfree makes, I don't know.
I'm sorry. I'll stop joking.
No, that was good. We need more of that. No, that.
I'm
That's
just
a good
glad
one.
Josh is contributing.
In order for them to be honest, they have to be able to lie.
Yeah, because
Same
then
for
that's
you.
when you can appreciate it, right? You can appreciate that person.
Yes.
I can trust in them because they're always honest.
Or the opportunity for discernment. I'm providing you the opportunity to detect my lies.
Mm-hmm. But I guess
Like it-
the
like it
point I'm
actually would
making is
be-
like I think you show like much more of a respect to a person by telling the truth, even if you don't respect them enough to want to hang out with them. You know, I at least feel more loved if you tell me.
Yeah, this is connected. Like
That's you.
this actually connects to we're kind of gonna go on a tangent, but like who cares? This connects to like the whole necessity of contingency. Like as I'm thinking about this, right, in which like
Yeah.
if we had a purely necessary world, like we would be unfree. Like there's a contingency necessary to it, in which
Right.
things cannot be perfectly certain. Otherwise, there's just something wrong with it. Like if everything was certain, then we would be unfree.
Yeah, the important aspect of contingency is that in order to be free, you have to free yourself, which means that there has to be a contingent moment where you choose whether or not to do that. It's you choose unfreedom freely, or you freely choose freedom, so to speak, and that's where the contingency is important.
Yeah. So like going back to the lying thing, like certainly, Josh, like only on the condition that we actually live in a world where we can lie. Can you bring up the thing like, oh well, I appreciate it more that people tell the truth.
Yes. Of course.
And this gives people who tell the truth a certain kind of measure of truth and reality, which people who lie don't. And in itself, it is itself a freedom. Remember this whole thing about the Schelling thing that like freedom also requires the capacity that we must have the choice to do evil. Otherwise,
Yes,
we wouldn't be
exactly.
free.
Yeah, I find the most intuitive example to think of is love, where it's like someone has to, through themselves, love you, and you through yourself love them. If you made them love you, if you could somehow will them just to love you, they wouldn't love you. They'd just be a thing that you've made, so to speak. It'd be an empty thing. It'd be a robot that you just programmed. In order for the love to be real, it had to occur independently and then independently join, so to speak, in order to be an actual love.
And the risk involved in it is what makes it so great, I would say. The risk that the other might not love you.
Oh yeah, like if that risk wasn't there, it just wouldn't be love. Like
Exactly.
that's one of the greatest. That's one of the greatest things from Hegel. That like in recognition, recognition is the most basic form of love and self-consciousness. The fact that the other is radically internally free and you cannot penetrate into them and overtake their will and force them to do anything on the pure level of will. Certainly, sure, you could like physically torture somebody and blah blah, but there are people with indomitable wills who like will not let you penetrate that way. There's nothing external you could possibly do. You could probably bash their brains in and cause them to have like cognitive problems, and that's probably the only way you're gonna quote unquote break into the will. But you've literally not broken their will. You've literally just broken their brain. You've broken their mind. Those people who just like are impenetrable in that way, they're the people whose recognition it matters, because they're the ones like the only way to get the recognition from them is that they willingly give it to you of their own account. What is it? Phenomenology Spirit, the self-conscious section. Yeah, he brings that up, and that's like where I got my notion for my article on Epoche about love, in which the absolutely negative nature of self-consciousness requires that both poles of the relationship, one person to another person, one consciousness to another consciousness, have a level of full self-determination imminent to them, and that this is what makes this is the only thing that makes recognition of a genuine value entirely of its own account on a level which nature could never achieve, no object could ever achieve. Only a personality could give you this satisfaction. You know, like when your parent says, like, you know, I'm proud of you, son, daughter, or whoever you are, you know, like that recognition, like only a human being, only a personality, a free personality could give you to this. You know, likewise, when you say the same back to them, only a free personality could do this. You know, when your partner loves you or praises the kinds of things that you do and says like, wow, that's amazing, blah, 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 and you feel great. Why? Because only they could give you that. You know, like an object cannot give you that. An animal cannot give you that. And not only can they only give you that, you know, an artwork can only give you its own limited enjoyment or, you know, reflection of freedom as an artwork, for example. But a human being can give you an infinite variety of recognitions, an infinite variety of like impulses which come from them, and you know, and so long as they remain themselves, so long as they are free, you know, they are enjoying life, they are creative, they are engaging in the process of creating themselves, creating you, creating the world. And you know, it's a self-feeding cycle of you know, just vitality. You know, they give breath to you, you give breath to them. It's probably the most wonderful thing.
I figured out some stuff about love because I was trying to figure out the distinction between like familial love and romantic love and stuff like that, because they are definitely distinct. And it's what happens is you have the concept of love, or like there's two moments of emphasis that differ that I call the platonic and the romantic. So we'll just use dyads as an example, like two people. And the point of love is that it is a free unity, and the unity can be emphasized either as one is two or two is one. And the platonic love is one is two. And this is where you love each other and are free, but through being more independent. The emphasis is on independence. So the love of a parent for a child, for example, is a love that ought to be oriented towards bringing about their independence and remaining connected by bringing about their independence. Like they can actually leave the home when they grow up, they are educated, and they can go meet someone. Whereas romantic love is two becoming one. It's actually where you move from independence to dependence. It's the same free union in both cases, but with different emphasis, from dependence to independence, or from independence to dependence. And in the case of romantic love, you're supposed to be canceling independence as your way of joining with each other, whereas in the case of platonic love, you're supposed to be producing independence as your way of joining with each other. And in romantic love, this literally consummates as, or in the case of like hetero relations, it can like physically penetrating each other and shit like that. And it produces a child which is dependent, like utterly dependent, in that it's when someone's pregnant, it's literally completely dependent on them until it's born, where it achieves a modest independence, but it's still completely dependent as like a baby or an infant. So it's part of producing a new person is like the platonic moment of, from the union of two becoming one as a free union in which independence becomes dependent, produces a highly dependent independence that has to platonically become independent as its free union with them, which then goes out and finds another partner and repeats the process. So the process of romance, family, reproduction, and so on forms the totality of love itself as free union, in repeating its particularized moments of two becoming one as independence moving towards dependence, and one becoming two as dependence moving towards independence. And so the entire cycle of like family, romance, and like the circle of platonic and romantic relationships forms the totality of love. I still need to think of that totality a little closer, because I think that'd be agape, which is closer to something like divine, but it's like a divine life. producing dependence and independence with different emphases. And it makes sense of why it's like, why is incest fucked up? Because I've never heard, like, it's obviously fucked up, but it's hard to think of actually a good argument. It's because incest is the romantic being realized where it's supposed to be platonic. You're taking something that begins dependently and is supposed to be becoming independent, and you're not letting that freedom come about. You're not raising your child to be independent. You're literally romantically involved with them. Yeah, so it's like the nature of platonic and romantic love as two poles or emphases on love as a process can help give you like why families make sense, why familial love's different from romantic love, the process of families and going out into society and forming families, and then producing people who go out into society and do this again and stuff. Harmonious.
Yeah, that was a really good example. I think that was the way you brought it up. That shows the whole self-determining dynamic of love, on the concrete level of human beings, what its role is, what its purpose is, and the whole.
And that argument on incest was one of the most interesting I've ever heard. I have to say,
it's actually. Like, given most of the conventional things we think of morally, it's actually really hard to argue against incest. It seems like you can adjust enough things, but it's like, if the point of making a kid is that they are dependent at the start, then in order for them to fulfill their freedom, you have to, it's your obligation as a loving parent to be producing their independence. And it's the same thing with, and people feel this stuff intuitively. Like, you meet a friend, and that's like, where you meet friends and you love each other as friends, but you always keep distance. It's like you don't hug your friend the same way you hug your partner. You don't hug your parents the same way you hug a romantic partner or something like that. Is because it's important to maintain the emphasis on independence as your way of being close. Whereas in romance, it's a reverse.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I see your point. I'm not entirely sure it's the strongest point one can make against that kind of incest. Parent-child incest, certainly. Many points you can make about that. I think it's much harder from the point you're coming from. It's much harder to. It still has the problems of I don't think that brings together the issues of say sibling incest. Which, by the way, Winfield. Winfield defends it.
Right. That's an interesting example. I'd have to think through.
Yeah, I remember
that. Because I think there's a way to argue against it imminently, coming from the nature of the family itself. But it's not. It does not happen strictly within the family. It has to do with you have to link it through the ethical life. I would say that the main problem with incest of all kinds, even siblings, is that there's a certain kind of crossing of a boundary that is seemingly and both logically going to entail a high risk of self-destruction of a kind of relationship that you don't want to destroy. Because there's a certain boundary you cross, and once you crossed it, it's not going to. You can't go back. So there's the family relationship itself does not remain as a family relationship.
That's interesting, and those are the sorts of arguments that I think need to be made, because a lot of the arguments don't work. Where somebody will be like, "Well, there's genetic issues with incest and stuff like that," but it's like. There's genetic issues with all sorts of people reproducing.
Yep.
It's not a good argument. You need something more substantial than that. This love argument is my closest. Although, yeah, that's another thing to consider.
Yeah. Let's not get off that tangent.
Yeah, the love argument is the best I've come up with, and it's got at least the kernel of what's true about it. Although Antonio made an interesting point here where, other sorts of relationships are destroyed in virtue of that, and that'd be interesting to flesh out more.
I thought
what's
about that.
Distinctive about sibling relationships and shit.
Yeah, I thought about that when I was like looking to my my confusion stuff. Which I think that the Confucians probably have some of the strongest arguments for family stuff. Anyways, let's not to go off track. Our silent listener here, mostly silent listener, asked, they commented, they said, from what I've heard, freedom sounds a lot like consciousness. I thought of a thought experiment I could give about free will. We'll see the second thing right now, but freedom is not like consciousness because we can impute this kind of freedom on anything. Remember back that I said we could give this over to a atom of gold, for example. An atom of gold has freedom. It does.
Monoatomic gold?
Yeah, monoatomic gold. Yeah. Because the atom as atom determines itself as the kind of being that it is. And it also has its own substantive self-enduring relationship.
The same applies to consciousness. You're basically describing it as consciousness, in my view.
Well, I would say that certainly consciousness would have this aspect, but it's not because it's based on consciousness.
It's equivalent to it, what I can see. I mean, if you feel there's a difference, I'm interested to hear it.
All right, like the difference would be that consciousness.
My free will example.
Let me go with the consciousness thing first. So the difference would be that consciousness, specifically for Hegel, in his perspective, consciousness is defined as the opposition of knowledge to an object. It's a knowing with an object which is grasped as something other than it. This has a form of self-determination. The most concrete form is that the original self-determination is that consciousness as such is really always self-consciousness. The undergirding reason is because the knowledge of an object is literally just the objectified knowledge of consciousness itself. What consciousness always has as an object, essentially, is its own structure of knowing, and consciousness is just that knowing. So, say if you have sense certainty, which, is Hegel's name for a radical empiricism like Hume, where you just have this, you don't specify it, it's just like this given by empirical experience, sensuousness. That which in the this, which is cognitively only the this, forget about the sense part of it, because you don't know the sense part of it. It's given. You're taking it for granted, but you don't actually know it. It's like saying, okay, I know what red is because I've seen red, but you're not actually explicating it. You're not really putting forth any knowledge of what redness is. To know, so, in knowing just like, okay, red is this thing, you point to the color red. All you're saying is really this. What I know is thisness. Well, what is thisness? Hegel says, well, it's just an empty universal. So, what you really have as an object is not the color red. What you really have as a cognitive object, really, is this empty universal. And this empty universal is the structure of your knowing. So, what you really are is self-conscious. What your conscious is conscious of consciousness itself. So this has a self-determining structure. Obviously then gold would also have a self-determining structure, but not in the way that consciousness does. Gold would have a self-determining structure in that gold has a self-determining process of being in which, obviously whatever the subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, we don't even know if neutrons are real anymore, and electrons, by some power of matter, immanent to matter, which is not upon matter, but it's something within matter itself, come together, form themselves, and maintain themselves in this relationship to themselves by their own nature and power. That is what makes them self-determining. So this is not an act of will, it's not an act of knowing, it's not an act of perception. So that's why, at least on the Hegelian terms, that's not consciousness. Though consciousness certainly has a structure of self-determination, which everything really has, to some extent or other. I don't know if that clarified anything.
I haven't changed my opinion, but it did clarify things. I mean, if something is described identically to something else, how do you distinguish it in a way? Not saying that Hegel necessarily even knew what he was talking about. Can I give my example about free will, or if that's too off topic, I don't mind just listening.
No, go ahead.
So I've been talking about this for a while, and for a while it did not go anywhere. Then we thought we went somewhere, and then it was sort of set back a lot, so it's been an evolving mess. But finally got a thought experiment to me that makes sense, where just imagine that, let's say, this is hypothetical, okay, so just bear with me, I'm not expecting any endorsements on this, but hypothetically, let's say that the laws of physics are determined, we know them. We build a machine that then tells us exactly what's going to happen in the future. Let's just simplify it to, I'm the only one who has this machine, because I've decided I want to give myself that edge. It's the perfect predictor. So then, what is the meaning of free will if I can then intercede on what will is, without my intercession, destined? Anyone confused as to what I just said? I realized it was a lot.
No, okay, I heard this. No, what I would say is, in order to bring this into proper... okay, all right, go continue.
I just want to make sure if anyone's lost now, I should clarify it, because it might get more complicated.
Okay, so you have a machine that can predict the future perfectly.
It's just a thought experiment, but let's say hypothetically such a machine could exist, and I'm the sole possessor of it. Then I could hypothetically intercede in what would have been destiny had I not interceded, aka just the flow of things. Like, I'm trying to establish basically not an argument for free will, but parameters on it.
Yeah, go ahead. It's pretty straightforward.
So hypothetical, that's fine. Now my power to affect the future, I have more free will in a way than anyone else, because I've got this edge. And free will is the ability to have your will be manifested outside of your immediacy, or your own subjectivity, or whatever you want to call it. It seems to kind of come down to an ability to determine the future. How much freedom there is to intercede on what would have been had there not been any contemplation of would have been inevitable.
I think
yeah, go ahead.
The example makes it a little tricky to think about, but I think this issue of prediction...
I can reframe it again to make it even more clear, okay? What we are functionally is simulators of the future. At the very minimum, we're simulators of the present, because that's why we can perceive our immediacy, but we're like more advanced as humans, so we tend to also simulate the future, usually horribly. But essentially everybody has what amounts to extremely limited free will, because if everyone is going for this, it's like a crab in the bucket situation with when you have finite things that everybody in theory wants, right? Very complicated thing, but essentially comes down to choice on the level of how accurate your simulation is of the future. Not in an absolute sense, but relative to everybody else. If everyone is around the same level, there's almost no, quote, free will in the sense that it's a crab in the bucket situation. Free will being the ability to sort of have something that others, in some sense, have either chosen not to have or can't have. Anyway, hopefully that helps, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this will be relevant, but I actually wrote this to somebody recently, just because they were using prediction language to talk about people and stuff like that. And I think there's a way in which you can kind of understand free, evolving, open, adaptive, dynamic feedback loop in self-aware predictors, where it's like, what I wrote is, I think one of the special things about people is that they are aware when someone else is predicting them. And so a person responds and adapts to being predicted. And in doing so, accounts for the way in which the others predict them as part of their response. So two people responding to each other are predicting each other and predicting the ways in which the other predicts them. This produces a free dynamic where our knowledge of our own predictability allows an intervention which we can make use of to alter activity. And so patterns that emerge from this circumstance are both logical, pattern producing, so they have a structure, but at the same time they are open because it depends on what I want to do, and it depends on what you want to do, and it depends on what we each think each other wants to do. Adaptive, because we're adapting to each other. Dynamic, because as you change, I change, and as I change, you change. And we change ourselves in light of the way we're changing ourselves. And evolving, where we maintain this logical pattern that we're producing between one another self-awarely. So because in being able to predict someone else and being aware that they're predicting me, I'm able actually to account for that and intervene in what I'm doing. And their knowledge that I can do that means that we both are predictably unpredictable or unpredictably predictable, so to speak. And so we can build patterns between one another that enable us to retain this capacity to feedback with one another productively in ways that could either impair us if we're antagonistic to each other or harmonize if we are pro-social, ethical, and so on.
Could I comment on that, or would you like to respond?
Yeah, you go ahead.
All right, I'll comment on that. So I'll go back to the first example you gave about the perfect prediction machine. You're the only one who has it, and therefore you can interject into the flow of causality and meddle with things that otherwise would happen had people not known about it. Had you not known about it? That's certainly an example of more freedom on a certain level, but it's not an example of free will, and there's a few reasons why. One reason would be that the free will concerns the capacity to determine our will, not the will of others, but rather really our own will. So in this case, the perfect predictor would be of no use for this consideration, because, for example, as the perfect predictor of the machine would then tell you what you would do, you could just say, well, I'm not going to do it. Unless you take the position, say, of that we have some kind of Greek fatedness, in which it's not a causal fate of the sort of the physical determinism, but rather a causal fate of a categorical causality. You're gonna die on Monday. Okay, it's and somehow that you were gonna die because you went on a plane. You decided, okay, I'm not gonna go on the plane. But somehow you die. You decide to stay home, do nothing. You die from a heart attack. Because the fate was you were going to die anyways. Well, that's just kind of a purely abstract notion of fate that has no efficacy to it, really. So we can dispense with that. But on the other side, if it could predict and it told you you're going to do this, you could just go say, well, I'm not going to do it. And that's that. Is the machine going to force you? Well, then it wouldn't be your will, so it wouldn't be able to predict your will. So, the reflexive problem of self-knowing leads to an ambiguity, an indeterminacy, in which you always have to decide. There's no given to the fact that you could know your future and not have the chance to say no. That if you didn't have that chance, then
just a model. Sorry, just so it doesn't get too off track. It's just a model. The idea is that you are an extremely crappy version of this perfect predictor machine. It's not a metaphor that could be unmade. It is itself the example that simplifies the reality.
Yeah. So even if you were the self-predictor, you would say, on Tuesday, I'm going to do this thing. Well, that's not a prediction. Right? That's or even
the
say...
idea with free will is that you can control other people. You said it's not, you can control yourself. I'm well, I think that's maybe part of it. So it was obviously very simplified, and I'll grant you that it's way better to control yourself than others, but that was a simplified version for the layperson.
I'm not critiquing on that ground. I'm just saying that on the level that we're talking about, freedom is a contextual nexus. So there's a level of a self-control, but it's not merely a level of self-control. So there's a level of that. You can always decide otherwise, but that's not what makes it free will as such. There's also the level of willing my will. And to will my will is not the same level, because I may have a will. So, I may have a desire to eat a burger. So long that's my will, and my freedom would be to actually go and eat that burger. But supposing that I had some reasons in which, I can mediate this and give myself a justification for why should I even bother to go eat that burger? Or, is it really important for me to get out of my bed and go and eat, drive 10 minutes to the McDonald's and get a burger? It's a pretty trivial, silly example. But, one isn't free in merely following through on one's desires. One is free in understanding and justifying one's desires to oneself. And the maximal form of freedom is not even just giving a justification, but giving justification for justification itself. That's the freedom Hegel offers. One, that's the power of the logic, in which you have the justification of justification itself. You have the rationality of reason itself, according to reason's own self-determination. That's what makes it freedom as such. It doesn't make it a freedom, but freedom as such, absolute. And Hegel says this isn't just my logic. This is the logic we all have access to as rational beings. We human beings, if we work ourselves up to this level of self-comprehension, we have that freedom too. And you can't get freer than that. And then there's a sense of freedom in relationship to other people, in which for Hegel, we can't be free if we are lord of the world. For Hegel, the idea that, my freedom is the freedom to dictate the terms of the world and of other people. Hegel says no, actually. Freedom is the freedom to let things be. That is the ultimate freedom, because, it's what we just brought up earlier about love, for example. When you love someone, that is the greatest freedom you could have in a social relationship. And that freedom is both a strange binding freedom that makes you dependent, but the dependence itself is the independence. In that strong dependence is also the most radical independence, because when you really love someone, you let them be. They're freely with you. They're not with you out of some compulsion. It's not just I feel, people say this. They're I hate to love you, for example. Well, if they hate to love you, then they don't really love you, right? They just have this, incoherence between their feelings and their rational will, insofar as they have any reason for it. So for Hegel, you can't be free if you're just the lord of the world. You don't have any other people whom you don't actually respect enough to just let them be. That would just mean that you have a conscious opposition and a logical opposition between yourself and others, in which you have to control everything, because the others are an imposition upon you, and you don't recognize that their freedom is constitutive of your freedom. All right, you got anything to add on that, Rain? We've talked about the social dimension of freedom a lot. Or Hyperion.
I don't think I've got anything to add on that. Well, that was good.
Oh, Hyperion posted something.
Did I? Yeah. That was. If you're gonna read it from bottom to top, because.
All right.
You know how Twitter does.
The Twitter.
Yeah. Posted something he tweeted. One does not have the freedom to believe lies. Only the abstract will, which follows from a false perspective of finitude, trusts deception, or opines without knowing. A will that is free would never choose that. For simplicity, think of the free will as one's better judgment. Moreover, the free will is not one which chooses to act unfavorably. Only the abstract will selects careless options. When reality is revealed to the subject, knowing willing itself, there is only one choice to be made, and that is the one which accesses the true and the good.
This is in response to somebody whose account was, I guess, deleted. But,
That happens a lot with the people we interview. Very strange.
They were asking me what freedom is contingently, and, what freedom has to do with choice, because I said something abstractly freedom has little to do with choice. I always use the example, your freedom isn't to go into a store and see all the different cereal boxes or deodorants or whatever, and choose, and you're like, yes, I have so many options, I'm free. You're not free. necessarily. You're choosing something arbitrary.
Yeah. I think this gives we spent a lot of time.
Especially if the choices don't even represent your own will.
Right.
It-
And
you
as
have
irony
choices.
said, you have to choose your options as well. Like the example he gave is, it's not the vegan isn't free to go into a meat shop and or not a meat shop, but like a restaurant that has only meat options.
Yep.
You have to make what your choice is. And in making what your choice is, you make one thing, your will.
Yep. You determine your will through becoming free.
Yeah, and this will get more concrete as we go on. So let's move on from the abstract. Well, I mean, we meandered quite a bit into other things, but I think
that's what people care about, though.
Yeah, I think that's we gave enough examples to kind of give an offset to that. So there's the abstract will, in which like radical indeterminacy. It's like I'm free insofar as I have the freedom to determine myself into any options, but I have no reason for any of these options. My freedom is just like, if I want it, I'll go get it. I would probably say that determinate freedom comes into the point in which, like, okay, you've decided for an option. Now, what happens? Like, how are you free in relation to that option? And like, let's choose something more meaningful than just like eating a burger or whatever. Suppose that you desire to determine yourself as an artist. You feel the impulse naturally given. You just have that tendency. Fine. And then you see, oh, well, in order for me to become a painter, let's say, particularly, I got to start sketching. I got to do about like 2 years of sketching like every day, and, to get up to speed into like the skill. Let's assume somebody with average talent, because talent is only a fraction of skill in art, really. So, let's assume you have to do that, and somebody's like, that's a barrier. Like that's an imposition upon me. My freedom would be that if I want to make art, I should be able to make art immediately. And Hegel says, well, the reality is you can't, and the reality is that you have these necessary conditions of existence in which you have to condition your body to gain a certain kind of muscle memory, a certain kind of hand-eye coordination, a certain kind of imagination to hand-eye coordination, in order for you to get to the point in which now I know how to sketch the things that I want, and then you move on to paint, and then painting itself is a different skill than sketching. And let's say you probably have to take about 4 years in total of your life to like practice and get to that. For Hegel, these things like, oh well, you have to learn how to sketch first, and then there's some money blocks on that, both digital and as well as physical, for cost supplies and whatnot. So those conditions as well. But the imminent conditions are particularly gaining the skill. So most people are like, oh man, I wish I could do art. I wish I could paint. But they're not willing to commit themselves to those 4 years. Actually, even by 2 years, you can. I've seen people that are like extremely decent, far above decent, I would say.
Well, but also like it's not like you first practice sketching; you never finish practicing.
Certainly, I mean, you always have to keep up the skill, and you always find new ways to do things. But to get to the point in which one would feel oneself to be decent. So there's that level of skill required. Most people say like, oh, I wish I could paint like that. And like they're like, would you like to paint like that? Like, yeah. They're like, okay, well, take a course. And they're like, oh no, I can't do that. It's too much. Too much time. And Hegel would say then you don't actually really want it. Like it's not really your will to determine yourself as an artist. You may say, oh, I wish I could paint like that. No, you don't actually wish you could paint like that, because you're not willing to commit yourself to that. You're not willing to actually determine yourself to that. So it's not really your will.
You wish you could will.
Yeah, you don't even have the will to will that, because when the moment you're presented with the actuality, oh, you could, you don't take it. It's like me. I used to like drawing, and sometimes I'm like, God, I wish I could paint. I even have a tablet, a digital tablet, and I have a paint program. I spent like about a week trying, and then I'm like, and I had plenty of time, by the way. I'm not gonna pretend I'm like, oh, I'm too busy or whatever. No, I got plenty of time. If I say, well, I wish I could paint like that, the reality is no, I don't. I don't want to commit to it. Ultimately, I'd rather just sit around and like watch YouTube videos and like bother trying to paint.
I got bullied by Mrs. Halstead, grade 3.
Mrs. Halstead?
Yeah, my teacher.
It's gonna kind of make one of those Reagan jokes. Tear down this wall, but I don't know what to say about that relationship.
I don't know. I definitely think the artist, the craftsman, is definitely, you're in a position that makes the relationship of freedom to necessity and the understanding of freedom as self-determination, not indeterminacy, way more concrete. In that, like, you need self-discipline. You can't just, like, play. You have to, like, fucking, I don't know, practicing is so grueling.
Yeah, it's,
I practice 2 times a day. Like, I practice so much. And even the greatest musicians, like actual professional musicians, are always practicing. And they have so much self-discipline. But that self-discipline allows their freedom of expression.
Well, right, but it's not like... I think that the greatest of them don't feel it as an imposition. It is grueling work.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's not work because it's exactly the process that they know they have to go through to get to what they desire. And when you have a vision, you will do anything to make it real.
Yeah.
Yeah, passion makes work worth it. It's not that it's not work, but it's always worth it, and you just feel like you've got to do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you understand that it actually isn't some means to this other end, but it is the end in itself.
And the greatest among them can freely and spontaneously improvise.
Indeed, in everything.
Painters, musicians, poets. Now, there are there's a freedom in manufacturing your art, but, like, not corporately manufacturing, but, like, you have a vision, an idea that you want to bring into being. But you could also freely and spontaneously create art. I'm undecided on which is better, but I like both.
I don't think anything's better. I mean, ideally,
there probably isn't a hard thing to it. But.
Ideally, I think there's just a different emphasis in creating art and appreciating art. Yeah. Although I think there's a special appreciation that only creators have for the art of other people.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's this understanding of working within limits that you yourself create, that aren't imposed upon you. They're your own.
That brings you back to something our mutual acquaintance said, that freedom is, deciding freely what you want to do and then doing it, or decide. He was talking about politics, but your freedom in politics is to decide your values, and then follow them.
Commenting on the appreciation that, like, other creators have for things other people create and stuff like that, and how there's something special. It's that people who create themselves, or like who do creative things, or really anybody with expertise or skill or craft or just a knowledge of something, is able to emulate the structures in which another person is creating, and in understanding the limitations, or the structures in which they produce something, they can appreciate the dynamic they managed to pull out of those structures often more deeply. Just anytime somebody has an expertise at something, really, somebody who is who's great at landscaping can appreciate the way maybe another expert landscaper has made the most out of the conditions of the yard they were working on, or something like that. Same with a skateboarder who understands what it's like to ride on a board, understand what it's like when your weight shifts like this, and when the wheels are like this and based on the contours of the thing you're skateboarding on. Another skateboarder who's really good has a deep appreciation of how another like great skateboarder is expressing those limits and bringing creativity out of those limits in the process of skateboarding or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea. It's the idea that necessity is the mother of invention. Is so true.
Yeah, just like
yeah,
go ahead.
Go on. Well, I was just gonna say, like, in general, like, I've noticed with the creation of art, like, in some ways, having more options open to you, having more technology, having more possible choices has hampered artists a lot. Like, when I look at, I don't know, the way music was produced in the early, like, rudimentary days, I feel like you see much more creativity because they have these limits that they're imposed onto them. They don't create these limits for themselves, but they have to work through them and around them in order to realize their own vision. Whereas I feel like today with like production, there's so many options. You can do almost anything you want, in which it's harder to figure out exactly how you're going to realize your vision for how the music is supposed to sound. So in some ways, it's better even to have like some external limit placed upon you in order to be free than to be indeterminate. Now, of course, like, real freedom isn't that. You're more free when you create your own limitations, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. As somebody who who has some tendencies towards creativity, it's totally true. I mean, like, I think it's anybody who engages that kind of stuff immediately notices, like, when you're given like too many options, like you don't know what to do with it, and it's hard to like hone in on like what it is exactly you want. You know, when things are actually quite strict, it becomes a lot easier to get to the core of what you want. You know, with writing, like, you know, one of the hardest things for me to do is just to get things down to what it is like that I coherently want to say on like a specific level. Otherwise, you know, everything ends up being just so open that I range over too many things. You know, like this talk, we've ranged over so many things because, you know, we didn't come in with a definite list of things to like talk about in like the order or whatnot. So, you know, we start meandering, we start getting to a lot of details, which, you know, may not be entirely pertinent, but that's just kind of what happens with that kind of stuff.
It's a reason why I think there's studies showing that people in arranged marriages sometimes are happier than people in you know, Western style marriages, or some people are happy to live in a dictatorship. Not that we advocate for dictatorships or arranged marriages, but I think the liberal idea of just choice and indeterminacy, people who operate under this viewpoint are really missing an important link between freedom and necessity in understanding why this may be the case, that some people are happier in arranged marriages.
Right. So to move the topic along, so, you know, with determinate freedom, fine, okay, we have somebody who wants to be an artist. Let's say they go ahead and do that. Let's specify further what kind of artist they want to be. Suppose they're one of our many Twitter artists nowadays who draw scantily clad anime women doing very questionable things. One then would rightly ask, well, should you be doing such a thing? You know, are you really free if you're actually doing that? Surely, I mean, these people enjoy it. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
But, you know,
seeing it.
Are they, you know, like, are they as free as they could be? You know, let's not even talk about should be, because should be implies a certain kind of thing that in Hegelianism doesn't really come about. But could they be freer than that? I mean, certainly, if you go through all that hassle of, you know, spending maybe like 4 years to learn how to draw, like and paint and make things look good, and what you spend your talent
All your
on,
commissions are.
yeah, all your commissions are like horse dongs and tentacles. Maybe you enjoy that, but you aren't really as free as you could be. I mean, like, a human being has far more creativity than just staring at horse dongs all day, and
I'm unfree
spending
for
hours.
having been subject to it.
Yeah. Like again, that person may be totally happy with that. That certainly may be the level of freedom at which they
the minimal
they are conscious of
the desire or inhibition or whatever.
Yeah. So they're following their desire. They're realizing it. They've actualized. They committed, and they commit to the fact of the determinacies of the conditions required to do what they do. But have they ever reflected? Is this what I ought to be doing? Can't I be doing something else more meaningful in my life that would be even more meaningful to me? I mean, there's a certain point in which I think people like I don't know if you know who this is, like Rake. After you draw like a couple thousand images of that kind, what kind of things would you say? Like, gee, I'm proud of this piece that I drew once. That's a keeper right there. That's something I'd like to give. I'd like to gift, like a friend. And like they would keep it as an heirloom in their family. It's like it's an artwork. To evoke something. They don't have that.
There's this is a tricky thing where it's like there's this. So some kinds of forms of self-realization are more strenuous, but there's also certain forms of self-realization that are more vegetative, where it's like people just want small variations on the same thing. Like somebody who likes building train sets or something like that, like building like train, like maybe they model like miniature train things and they have like a landscape and they get little like in trees and they do all the detail and stuff. And they love fucking trains. And it's just about constantly repeating, but always making minor differentiations of the same thing. There are some kinds of... there's certain kinds of YouTube things I can just watch. Or like people who watch sports. They don't want football to change, necessarily, in big ways. But they want to see more of the same, but with enough variation to keep it just fresh enough.
Sure.
I don't know. There's got to be something to be said for that kind of a thing, because everybody
it certainly is a freedom, but is it the most free that they could be? That's the question, and I think they certainly be freer. Obviously you can't come like somebody like like the Christians, knocking your door. Like, don't you think you have better things to do in your life than like sitting around and playing video games? I probably do, lady, but I prefer not to. Not that I play video games. I quit video games like 10 years ago. They bore me. But that's why it's not a question of like what a person like immediately wants or not. Somebody can be totally happy with that. That is the extent of freedom that they may develop. But could they be freer? Could we, as the kind of being that we are, be freer than that? Certainly. This is where the question of free will comes in. There's the abstract will, which holds itself free only insofar as it hasn't chosen anything yet. It wants to be able to have the freedom to choose anything. But once you've chosen something, you're locked in. Like there's certain things that now you can't do because you've chosen something. You are determined now. It doesn't fully close off possibilities, but it certainly narrows the possibilities down big time. But then the question of the possibilities of why this determination and why not another is the question of free will, really, where what is the will's determination of itself? Why do I choose to choose this choice? Because the determinate will just says like, well, I want it. Okay, that's just what I want. Whatever reason, don't care. It is what I want. It's what I desire. I'll go with it. All right. Hegel's philosophy brings us to a standpoint in which we have to reflect on like why, why have we chosen this thing, and after we've reflected on why we have chosen this thing, what this thing even is, we then stand back and say, do I really want to keep up with this? Because there's certain things in which you thought you wanted to do them, and you enjoy doing them, and there's a certain kind of like I don't know if that's ever happened to you, any of you, where you have a realization about it. You understand something about it, and then you realize, you know what, I actually don't want to be doing this. Now that I comprehend it. That's an act of free. That is the genuine act of free will.
Mm-hmm.
It's the comprehension of something and the affirmation or negation by that comprehension. That I agree to take this thing was given. I unconsciously went along with it. I didn't know, but now that I know, I either affirm or I deny this thing. Now only then am I really at the standpoint like this is my will. Because before that, it is just like, it's not my will, because me and my will are not separate. Before that, I am just my will, and my will is just this given tendencies and desires. But once I step back and situate myself as opposite of my will at a distance, only then can I then affirm this is my will. And that's only the immediate personal relationship. For Hegel, the free will really is this social self mediated comprehension which is objectively established. For Hegel, something like property is free will, really, objectively, because there is will, my will, coming before will, the will of that other person, mediating itself with him, coming to an agreement in which reason finds itself rational and choosing to stand it's by that decision, to determine itself by that structure. Families. Family is a kind of free will, far more determinate free will. Because the same things, two wills come together as one will, internally unified by a process of a comprehension and a desire. And the desire is not gone through without a comprehension of it. And it doesn't have to be some great, deep comprehension. You don't have to have philosophical comprehension of this, but you have to have comprehension of some sort in order for it to be the free will. Politics is free will. Economics is free will for Hegel. Law is free will. The state is free will.
Properly determined. Properly itself. Not just a state.
Yes. Not just a state, but the state.
That'll have to be part
state.
2. What is the state? Not in the will or freedom discussion. But...
Yeah. Let's not get off on that tangent.
Yeah.
I think.
Therefore, I am. Is that what you're gonna say? That's part of it.
I want to say there's an important element of free will, which is its proximity, locality. That. All right. This is. Yeah. That particularity has an essential moment in that. Freely willing involves specification and objectification in, again, like we were talking about earlier, limited given present circumstances. This is sort of saying ought implies can. So part of free will is that there is not more expected of one than the best one can do.
Yeah.
Which can have a very variable meaning depending on where we are in history, where you are in a society, and so on. So there's a relativity. Like there is indeed like absolute freedom, but the process of like getting there, the provisional freedom that's on the way, the relative particularizations, is still accomplishing freedom. Given what it can at that moment in history, or even in like people's personal lives and so on, and like not everybody arguably the freest thing you could do is philosophy, and like no free self-determination itself. That's arguably the freest thing you could do. But it's not entirely obvious that everyone could do that.
Okay. Actually, wonderful that you brought that up. This brings us to where I began this whole talk. This whole comes to mind because we had those discussions with Spirit Man, and this was precisely the crux of our difference, if you remember. That Spirit Man thinks there is an ought which does not imply can in a concrete sense. He thinks we all can and we all ought to, should be geared towards universal problems to solve everything. And if you're not doing that, the problem is with you, the individual, because if you really understood absolute spirit, as he thinks he does, you would really understand that you have to, like what we really have to get to is just like the concrete matters of everything, and therefore, you should be committed to the universal as everything. Therefore, you should be committed to like, it's kind of like I mentioned earlier. It's like he has a sort of like messianic view of the Christian proselytizing outlook, in which you have to change the mind of everybody, you have to save everybody, or at least you have to you attempt. And you got to attempt to do everything, and that's part of his problem. He wants to do everything. He wants everybody to be doing everything. It's not like, oh, you do this, I do that, and things will come together as they do. No, he's like, we all have to be doing everything at once. We all have to be working for the universal scope at once, and that's precisely not what freedom is. Like the reason I brought up the whole discussion about the universal, particular, individual was to set up for this. In which that reality, in which the universals, the all of everything, the absolute, particularizes and individualizes itself, carries on entirely and completely to freedom as existent, in which every individual has this tendency in them, in which to some greater or lesser extent, everybody has to actualize freedom. Everybody, even people who hate their lives, even people like Schopenhauer, actualize freedom and desire to actualize freedom to a certain extent, even in the self-annihilation. That itself is an act of freedom, contradictory as it may be. And so what Hegel's concept of freedom allows is that you don't have to force yourself. This isn't Kantianism, where you have the moral law, and the moral law is supposed to be independent of you desiring what's good or not. Kant says you do it because of duty, not because you enjoy it, not because you actually want it, but because you just rationally understand it and you submit yourself to the autonomy of the law. And Hegel says no. Not only is there no such thing as this moral law, there isn't this formal thing that applies to everyone. That which does apply to everyone has a specific rule in everyone. It's like having a moral law specific to you, in the deepest concrete sense, in which obviously what you want to do is live your life. Everybody wants to be free. They want to be free in living their life. What you want to do is you want to actualize your desires. And Hegel says, well, fine. That's just a given. You are a natural being. You're born with desires. You're born with tendencies. You're born in a culture which you didn't choose. You're enculturated in that. Your parents raised you a certain way. Your schools teach you a certain thing. And so you'll have certain particularities and peculiarities, which are both natural and culturally given. And, and every individual has their own little mix of that. And so some people will be artists. Some people will be businessmen. Some people will be MMA fighters, some people will be political commentators, some people will be politicians. And Hegel's whole thing is, if that's where your heart lies, if that's where your passion lies, then by all means, that is what you should be doing, because that's the only thing that will allow you to keep the engine of life going. It's the only thing that's going to allow you to keep the whole cycle of self-production going on indefinitely. Until, the day you die. Because if you love art, you can do art your entire life. if you love political commentating, you can do that your entire life. You're never gonna wake up and say, God, I hate this job, because it is what you want to do. If you love philosophy, you do philosophy. If you love art, you go and do art. You don't try to do everything. And Hegel himself says, I think he comments it specifically about Goethe, which he says, genius, by and large, it is extremely rare to have a universal genius, but genius, by and large, is the cause and the effect of extreme limitation, extreme self-limitation, where a person just gives himself to the singularity of one pursuit, which is very specific, and they hone themselves and perfect themselves into that. Hegel says it's better to be great at one single thing than to try to be mediocre at everything. Being mediocre at everything isn't going to be very helpful in the long run. It's not bad to be that. Maybe you want to do that. Okay, fine. But it's not something that everyone should be. There's a certain kind of well-roundedness that we should have, yes, in the background of our culture, in our enculturation, in our practical lives. And there's a way in which philosophy, or really proper education of any kind, which is inherently philosophical to a deep extent. Not necessarily formally philosophical, but the elements of thought are really in it. A proper education will always make you a universal individual. You will think about things in a concreteness. You will try to interrelate things. You will be interdisciplinary. But in order to be interdisciplinary, in order to gain that kind of concreteness, doesn't mean that you have to be a master of all the disciplines which you connect together. It's extremely rare that an individual has that capacity, especially now. It's rare enough that you hear somebody that's an expert on like 2 fields, let alone more than that, and that they're leading experts, by the way. So I would say that the key takeaway for me, about Hegel's concept of freedom, is there's no opposition to determinism as such. The only opposition is that determinism would be absolute, because determinism is the logic of something always determining another. But with Hegel, we come to understand that we, particularly the mind, our mind, not the human mind, because the human mind is the mind. If there were aliens, they would have the same kind of mind we do, not necessarily the same kinds of cultural attitudes or anything, or belief systems, but they would have the same kind of mind we do. They would have the same kind of rational structures, so to say. The mind is absolutely self-determining. The mind alone is absolutely free. Everything else has some kind of relative freedom, but the mind is where freedom as such is. We have minds, we are thinking beings, we are rational. We therefore, to that extent, are absolutely free beings. And for Hegel, this isn't a joke. This isn't just we're some kind of, in theory, you could be free. No, we are absolutely free. Full stop, no question, no qualifications. We are absolutely free. And part of that absolute freedom is our capacity and is our reality. As the kind of beings, the bodily beings that we are, the kind of active, artistic beings, aesthetic beings, creative beings that we are, let's put it into the Marxist terms, labor. All these things are our self-determinations. Sometimes things feel like limitations initially, because we don't understand them. And that's a lot that comes up in Hegel, that understanding, comprehension of the world, of how things really are and what things really are, and the ways reason really is, brings to us a kind of freedom in which we recognize that these things that seem to be impositions external to us, which were conditioning us and keeping us from realizing the things that we supposedly want, there's a certain kind of understanding that we realize then, one, the things that we wanted, in a lot of cases, aren't real. They're literally just figments we become obsessed with, but they were never a thing on the plate of reality. They never will be a thing on the plate of reality. A concrete thing that I'm going to bring up here is this common malaise of people who say, I just want to be free. I don't know what to do with my life. I just want to be free. as if there is this thing just abstract, or rather they want to say, I just want to be happy. As if there's this thing called abstract happiness that, you could just have. Just happiness, out of nowhere, for no reason. And Hegel's whole thing is like, if you understand that this is a complete bunch of nonsense, that it's literally a non-concept, it's an unthought, it's unintelligible, and you really understand what it takes to be happy, that nobody's just happy, nobody just like exists in happiness. Well, there are some people who actually do, but they're happy, they got there and they're happy being there, and they weren't despairing about that in the first place. People like Zen Buddhists just kind of love to just sit around and vegetate, but they're happy that way, so perfectly good for them. Yogis as well, but they're not doing anything determinate in the first place. So how do they want to be happy, and they want to be happy doing nothing, and they're happy doing nothing, therefore fine, they've got the means, they've got the methods, and they've got the end given, and they can achieve it. It's perfectly rational. It's perfectly intelligible. We have somebody who is where they're at, and they want to be there, and that's where they should be. But somebody who says, like, I just want to be happy, but I'm not happy with the current way that I am. It's like, you ask them, well, what is it that you actually want to do? They're like, well, I don't know. Obviously this is a malaise mostly of, you find now like college people, university students. And the big reason that they're unhappy is they have nothing that they want to actually be. They are not determinate in any way, like bland people. Quite literally, they have nothing which they have geared themselves to. They have literally made no choices of what it is that they want to be. And they're like, well, I just don't feel any desire for anything. Well, when you don't feel any desire for anything, when you don't have any reason to do anything, then the only rational thing to do is obviously just start trying. It's like going to a restaurant with a kind of food that you've never had. You're like, what do I try? I don't know. Like, what's good? Well, maybe some people there, who are used to that cuisine will think a certain kind of thing is good, but they may not have the taste that you have, so their suggestions wouldn't necessarily count for you. So, what do you do with that? You just start trying stuff, right? And that's what people miss out nowadays on a lot of that. They forget that they have to try something. There's a lot of stories, particularly with people forced to do things by their parents, in which initially they hate it. There's plenty of musicians like, I didn't want to play music. My parents put them in some kind of band camp or whatever, and join music class. And at first, the whole practice thing is like, oh God, I hate it. It's torture. I don't want it. But once you gain the skill, you start to play around with it, because now the skill is being gained, and you can use it, pretty easily. And so, things come up in your mind, or you hear something and it just kind of sparks, and you're like, oh, I wonder if I could do that. And you start playing around, and then the joy starts to come through about this thing that originally was imposed upon you, was not a determination you gave yourself, but then afterwards you reflect upon it. It's like, you know what, I'm glad I was forced to do that. Now I enjoy it. Now I have this thing that I do for the rest of my life. I don't know, anybody got anything to comment about that?
Yeah. There's like two ways in which people can be dissatisfied with that kind of abstract freedom, especially with regards to what should I do with my life. One is wanting to do everything, and so you fear doing something, because that would mean you start determining yourself and thus closing out those other possibilities. And so they don't do anything, and so they're dissatisfied. And then the other is not wanting to do anything at all, which is the same dissatisfaction, but coming from the different direction. So I don't know. It's almost like somebody being like, oh, should I be an artist, or should I be a rock star, or should I, like, and on and on and on and on. You have to start doing something, or else you will be dissatisfied just in virtue of empty fantasies, or like fear of determining yourself, basically. You have to determine yourself.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think that's part of it is that some people just they want to do everything, and that's why they end up doing nothing. And it's like, and even if they, kind of like try around, because nothing immediately calls to them, like they decide, well, then this must not be for me, because the notion's gone now that sometimes you just got to commit to something, whatever, like for example, in artistic stuff, you may not be interested. Most people aren't. Most people would like to, they say, but they don't want to commit to it. Were they forced to commit to it, though, once they had the skill, most people would actually probably enjoy it very much. And some of these skills aren't even that hard to get, really. There's this guy, what was his name? Jacques Fresco. He was an architect, engineer, called himself a social engineer. Obviously you have to know you have to have some drawing skills, if you're going to be an architect, you're going to be drawing out plans and whatnot. But he sometimes, it's like, I think his wife was more of an artist, and they give like some art classes sometimes where they were at. And they developed this kind of little routine for people. And, people would come in and like, oh, well, I'm no good at art. He's like, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you say that, but have you ever actually tried? And they're like, oh, well, it's like, I try, and like my stuff looks horrible. And he's like, forget about how your stuff looks like, compared to everybody else. And there was some like little tricks that he had in which like you could learn to guide the designs pretty quickly in a very simplistic aesthetic sense. And he would get people to do that, like within like 2 sessions, they were drawing things that were like, decent enough for a beginner. And people were surprised, like, oh, I thought art was like way more difficult. It would take me like so long. And they're like, well, it is difficult, and it will take you a long time if you want to get really, really good at it. But if you want to get like actually okay-ish to a point like where you could draw something and you can see what it is, and so the other person can tell what it is, and it's not offensive to the eyes, it's actually not that much. But you do have to put at least a little bit of commitment to even find out. So people aren't even willing to put in the commitment to find out, let alone try.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do with like some effort, but not too much effort, where you can get it to a level of like neat. Like it's like neat that you can do that. Like you yourself will be like, neat, I did that.
Yeah, and and a lot of this stuff it is just that. There's a certain times in which you do things because you're interested. Like I got into photography because I was interested. At first, I was awful as everybody is, and then like one of the ways I ended up learning is just you start getting a sense. You literally start getting a sense for framing, and for color editing and all these other things, just by encountering good photography, and you start just getting this intuitive sense of it, and after that is just kind of like learning tricks of the trade, and learning the ways your camera actually works, which some cameras are more or less complex, learning your editing software, some of them are more or less complex, and then just willing to play around. A lot of stuff I just learned because I wanted to play around, and like I didn't know what the heck something was called or whatever, and it just kind of took some time. Sometimes it was frustrating to find out what it is that I even wanted to know, because I couldn't phrase it in a way that Google would give me results on what I wanted. But sometimes you just got to put in that effort just to find out what it is that you're even looking for. And all of that's an act of self-determination. To bring it back to that importance, I would say that for me, the importance of Hegelianism is that precisely that. It gives you a comprehension of freedom. It gives you a comprehension in which there is an objective good. There is an objective truth. It's not just some kind of fictions we make up. It's not just things we project onto the world. But this is not given. This isn't some absolute necessity that was decided from eternity. Eternity was back then, it is now, and it will be in the future. What's decided in eternity is also decided now. So, there's plenty of things which can always change. That's literally the whole purpose of time. The whole purpose of time is to separate the possibilities so that we can even have the choices of possibilities and the differentiating actualities. Things could have been different. Things could be different now, insofar as we make different choices. Things could be different in the future, insofar as people in the future make different choices. None of these things are given. Freedom is indeed self-determination. And the best things, as far as like a life philosophy goes, Hegel's whole thing is, I can't tell you what to do or what to be, or like how to live your life, because only you can be you. Only you know what it is that you actually have a passion for. Only you can find out. And once you have found it out, and once you have determined yourself, the best thing you could possibly do is just take that freedom to its highest conclusion. And for Hegel indeed, you're going to specialize yourself in something, and you're going to do it ideally you'll do it out of passion. Then ideally, not only will your passion be focused on that one singular general particular thing, but you're going to rise above that as a universal thinking being, and you're going to grasp the unity of what it is that you do with the rest of the world. And you'll be able to link those things. Will it always be practically linkable? No, because Hegel also allows the fact that, look, we live in a world with other people. We live in a world with nature, in which there's just externalities. There are things always outside of you which will always be conditioning you. And that's part of the deal. That's part of, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to be free. If we didn't have this incongruence of essence and appearance, we wouldn't even have the capacity to come into freedom. If freedom was just given to us, it wouldn't be free. What makes freedom free for Hegel is that, in fact, we are free at the beginning. We just don't know it. And the game of life, the game of history, the game of everything, the game of being, quite literally is to become aware that we are free. And once you achieve that awareness, you realize the whole thing, there was never a point in which you were actually unfree. There's a certain kind of comprehension that at a certain level, this is all on us. It may not be, we can't, there's a certain radical sense in which Hegel says we can even say it's all on me. But most people aren't willing to go that far. But we can certainly say it's all on us. This whole game of history, for example, let's put it like, let's take the Marxist frame in which he said, there's the necessity of history. History is, Marx says history is the history of necessity insofar as, labor is conditioned in a world of want and need. You have to have housing, you have to work for food, and all these things, that's why human beings, have to have economies, because they have to take care of those needs. And, insofar as they have to take care of those needs, like that's just a part of life where, you aren't yourself fully, because you're doing something out of compulsion. And Hegel goes ahead and says that, and actually, before we go to Hegel, so Marx brings the whole this kind of thing like, it's because of this compulsion that we have class society, because these things allowed for some people to have these natural distinctions of power and strength. Some people took over others, and they made the other people workers, and they exploited them, and they took away part of the things that they farmed, their animals, their wheat, whatever it is, and they lived as the nobles, and that's how the classes and religions, all these things. And Marx pins that essentially on this unfreedom of just our slavery to nature. And Hegel comes in and kind of takes the leg out of that and says, no, it's all our fault. We can't blame nature for this. It is all our fault. It was our choice from the beginning. Things didn't have to necessarily go as badly as they did. There's a certain level of necessity of nature, yes, but did we have to have the kind of brutalities that we did? In an ideal abstract sense, well, no. Given the kinds of beings that we were, however, given our kind of ignorance, of course then it was a need. Of course that kind of thing was going to happen. So then we can't look back and say, oh God, we were so stupid. Oh, how terrible, you can't be guilty about it. In the Hegelian, it can be your fault, but you don't have to be guilty about it. Because there's also comprehension. We were ignorant, and we indeed were ignorant. We're ignorant now. And I think that there's an extreme psychologically freeing power to this, in which it frees you from what is that word for like hating humanity or whatever?
Misanthropy.
Misanthropy, yeah. It frees us from misanthropy. Sorry, my voice is cracking. It frees us from misanthropy. It frees us from the religious guilt of original sin. It frees us from the guilt of these people are bad. We are good, or we are bad and these people are good. Actually, let me go get a drink. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Rain, or anyone else.
There was a section in there that was basically the summary of a perfect acid trip. Yeah, it was the middle section especially. It was just it was all on us. It was all on you. There's nothing but that the whole time, even though you weren't aware of it, but it actually was the whole time. And perfect conclusion, perfect story, wouldn't change a thing in the ultimate sense, kind of stuff. That's that's what the summary of the perfect psychedelic trip, basically.
Yeah. Not only is this to say that this has a psychological value in which it frees you from that guilt, and it doesn't free you from responsibility. You are responsible, but you don't have to be guilty about it because you understand why it happened. It doesn't excuse it, in a moral sense. It excuses it on the human level of, the same way in which you can understand people who do horrible things. Most people who do horrible things had horrible things done to them. It's just a cycle of violence, a cycle of ignorance, a cycle of vengeance. And when people go oh my God, how can people be monsters and all these other things? You come to comprehend, if I were in their shoes, I would be that monster too. It also keeps you from taking the high road and thinking that you can place absolute guilt on other people. Those people are infinitely bad, irredeemable, and blah blah blah. And it keeps you from that judgment because you understand, what it is to be the kind of beings that we are. Somebody asked, if I had the power of Bill Gates, I'd be doing this and that. Well, if you had the power of Bill Gates, you'd be Bill Gates, motherfucker. You would be Bill Gates down to a T. How did Bill Gates get to where he is? Because he is Bill Gates. Because he's a fucking manipulative asshole. Because he's a fucking selfish prick. Because he's a power tripper. If you got there, you'd get there precisely because of the same reasons he did. It's the same reason, this idea of if only we could have world peace. Well, you're not going to have world peace without the actual conditions in the history of peace. And the history of peace involves a lot of violence. Because that is the kind of beings that we are. It's the hand we were given. We start in the middle with a given reality. The point is to become aware within that given reality. And it's extremely hard, as we can see. Humanity's been around quote unquote modern humanity's been around about 200,000 years, supposedly. 200,000 years of just the most horrible shit. We've committed genocides upon each other for most of history. Now the things that we do to each other seem awful, but relatively speaking are actually pretty tame in comparison of numbers and quantities and qualities even. I mean truly. Like shit, even you compare things like back, say, like to the Mongol invasions of, you know, the Middle Ages. The violence, the wanton like violence, and just like disregard of human life, is unbelievable. You know, nowadays, you know, our wars seem tame. Even world wars seem tame by comparison.
Yeah, the reconciliation is that, like, it is good that we were able to do those things. It's not good necessarily that it happens. It's good that we are able to. And that, like, good is done.
Yeah, that quote you posted.
For its own sake.
Yeah, the Augustine quote that you posted, God judged it better to bring good out of evil than not to permit any evil to exist. It's pretty straightforward on that. Hegel certainly agrees. For Hegel, evil is finitude. It's the perspective of finitude which mistakes itself as infinite. But, you know, if we conceive, if we give the name of evil to that existence and view, nonetheless, you know, the good has that finite within it. Therefore, evil is a part of the good. It's just like, it's no longer evil once it is put in its proper place. You know, once the part doesn't try to be a cancer, you know, once the cells within your body don't try to overtake your body as a whole, and remain just the cells that they are, then they're good. You know, they've found their place, they found their purpose in the system of reality. You know,
there's a... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to bring up, you brought that up the other day about the people who go like, oh, well, you know, you don't really do good things because, you know, they're all selfish. You know, like, oh, you went and fed this homeless man? Oh, you only did that because you're selfish, because they made you happy. And you brought up the whole objection, like, what, am I supposed to, like, not be happy to help people? Is good supposed to feel awful or something? You know, what kind of fucking nonsense is that? You know, how would that be a rational reality?
Am I supposed to actually hate doing the good? Doesn't that mean I'm, like, not good? If I hate it?
Yeah, you know, there's this religious idea of, you know, a self negation, in which, oh, you know, you shouldn't do things for your pleasure, you got to do it for, like, the pleasure of God. And this is a completely false dichotomy. You know, it's not like, you know, oh, you can't be selfish. And Hegel says, no, you ought to be selfish. Selfishness is good. The thing is, there's a good selfishness and there's a bad selfishness. You know, a selfishness which is evil is a selfishness which, you know, tries to lord itself upon the whole and therefore comes to destroy itself. It's like a cancer, you know, tries to take one type of cell, takes over the entire body, therefore destroys its own condition, dies. But there's a good kind of selfishness in which, you know, like, the liver wants to be the liver and maintains itself being a liver. And therefore, and as a liver, it takes part in the system of the body, you know, and we maintain ourselves in homeostasis and keep on alive. Likewise, the selfishness of an artist, like, well, I don't want to do politics, you know, I don't want to be on Broadway. I don't want to be working in a factory. I don't want to be on a farmer, you know, like, and people are like, how dare you, you know, like, privilege this one thing that you're doing, like, you know, like, while children are starving in Africa, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Well, you know, if you're an artist, you know, a good artist, somebody who has visions, you go into Africa and, like, spending the rest of your life, you know, being, say, like what Peter Singer tells us, in which, like, you know, we got to give up all our time to just maximize the happiness of the most people, you know, giving food and growing food, or, you know, say in Africa. Hegel gives you a pretty damn good reason why you shouldn't do that, because that's not actually how you're going to actually help the world to be better to the greatest extent. The greatest thing you could do for the world is to follow your passions and be free. You know, it's not just follow your passions blindly, but be free in your passions and carry them to the furthest logical extent. You may not be
Insofar
aiming.
as you can fit them to the circumstance.
Yeah, insofar as you can fit them to the circumstance. And sometimes if the circumstances are against it and you have to sacrifice your life to finish that thing, you finish that thing. And, that's how it is. And plenty of people are willing to do that.
And of course,
Go
a
ahead.
passion isn't a whim. I feel like people always misunderstand this.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not a whim. Go ahead, Rain.
Regarding the Christian self-denial asceticism, like the self-flagellatory conception of morality, which I strongly disagree with. I think that's actually, I think when it comes to morality, this is like the egoism altruism debate. There's two evil poles. One is actually the self-flagellatory pole, and the other is the the enslaver dominator pole. They're actually both equally wrong. They will the same reality technically, because if you have no interest, then you are basically saying nobody should have any interest. Therefore, there's no other people. You don't want a world with other people, basically, and that's willing that everybody empty themselves, so that the first slaver who comes along, everybody has to just obey to a slaver. So somebody who completely self-empties like that wills slavery effectively, just as the slaver who says nobody else has, I'm the only one with an internal will or an interest, therefore everybody else I get to enslave. The point is, both are abstract poles when treated, finite poles as when absolutized, are self-annulling, are contradictory, and will actually a dark reality. But I was discussing theology and religion with some people on a Discord philosophy thing, and the issue is the distinction between loving God and loving your neighbor and loving yourself. And I replied to them, my thinking is that because God creates out of love and he possesses an infinite interest and investment in his creations, our own interests and personal ties, that is our love for our families and friends, accomplish both our ends and his ends, because they are ultimately united. In that sense, we are never forced, a la Kierkegaard, to blindly accept a decree from on high that is intrinsically impenetrable. To do the right thing is to do right by yourself, by others, and by God, as all three are inseparable. This also means implicitly that in doing wrong, you harm not only others, but yourself. The importance of this last point is that God is not an external coercive force, but our own most truth. And so we are not simply subordinating ourselves when we carry out God's will. We actually become more ourselves by living in the light of God. So the point is that these things aren't absolutely separable. They're absolutely united. They come into conflict in particular circumstances, but the negotiation and harmonization of those circumstances itself accomplishes an absolutely good thing.
Yeah, definitely. When Jesus said that there's only one commandment, it's the one to love your neighbor like you love as you love yourself. And there's plenty of passages. I think it's Paul who says God is love itself, and it's a deeply speculative passage. Hegel certainly agrees that that to engage in the free recognition of oneself, the free recognition of another, their free recognition of us, mutual recognition. This also implies the joy of freedom itself. Actually, we were talking about this, a couple months ago, right? About the animal thing. It wasn't the crow thing, but it was more generally about the animals, in which I certainly feel this. Can't speak for anybody else, but it seems to me there's plenty of people in the world who also feel this, that they just enjoy seeing and observing nature, and that there is a joy in just letting things be. There's a joy in just watching the flowers grow in your garden. There's a joy in just watching the trees swaying in the wind. There's a joy in just watching your dog laze around or chase things, for no utilitarian purpose other than that is what they are in their deepest lived joyful expression, in which like like they are full of life. It is like the way in which like they are self-perpetuating themselves. There's that deep joy as well, in which like freedom, when you are a truly free person, you don't want to be the tyrant of the world.
Yeah. I had a thought about, because it's connected to this, and it's connected to the issue of animal ethics. And I was having a thought, which was that it's not wrong to objectify animals in certain instances. Like obviously, you can only give like rights to creatures that can self-limit, other rational beings that can recognize rights and therefore self-limit themselves and be free in that self-limitation. So in that sense, rational beings do have dominion over nature. But I was thinking that because it's so obvious that things like factory farming, like hundreds and hundreds of cows in just like one like tiny pens the size of their body, that seems wrong still, even though we do have dominion and therefore stewardship over nature, because nature is a condition of our own freedom, so we have stewardship as well as dominion. I was thinking that because life, even though life does prey on life, like life objectifies itself to life, life is not utterly just an object. And so in that sense, things like factory farming might still go too far, where it's like, even though life is objectifiable, it's not absolutely objectifiable in the way that seems implied by things like factory farming.
No, certainly, and it's because we recognize very clearly and quickly animals are conscious. Like, it takes an entirely fucked up society to get you into the mindset that animals aren't conscious, and to not have sympathy with them. I mean, we know that's a historical sociological fact. So certainly, I think that just like by virtue that animals have consciousness, like we cannot reduce them to objects, and we have a natural sympathy. I mean, children have a natural sympathy with animals. You show them an animal, and like, to them it's you teach them, well, this is another conscious being, and they notice that's alive, and they treat them like another person. Like they project personality upon them. They can't help it. We are social beings. So I think even now you show most people what a factory farm is like, and they can't bear to look at it. They want to look away.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because this implies like a certain kind of leeway that just feels right, which is like say someone's hunting, it's like that animal lives in the woods, it's in its own natural conditions, it's in conditions that are basically fit for it. There's a sense in which it's the act of killing it or something like that is not totally against its natural condition, or even like something like having chickens in like that you keep that like get to go around in grass and stuff like that. Even if you have them for the purposes of like eating chicken because I don't know, you need your sustenance farmer or something like that. That's not like grotesque. The chicken still gets its life to some extent or another. Whereas things like factory farming push that objectification to its limit, where its entire life is totalized beginning to end in ways that compromise it to a degree of efficiency such that every last thing about it is oriented towards just being like a product. It's not given any indulgence regarding its own internal purposes, its own fulfillment. Things like hunting or like certain kinds of farming that can still involve slaughtering animals, much more fit with like the concept of life or like natural living creatures than something like factory farming does. Like it's almost like people's pastoral intuition regarding animal treatment is more appropriate. It is like fit to the concept of life and like the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God, once again, like, and let's get close to wrapping. So we've been going for 3 hours, so that'd be a perfect place to end. Yeah, I would say like, I don't know if you've actually read a bit more philosophy than I have, quite frankly, and I've never encountered anything like this concept of freedom. It's everything. It really is everything. Like there's nothing outside of it. It's metaphysical, ontological, moral, natural, ethical, everything. It includes everything. So, we can talk about freedom in the existential modes of nature. We can talk about freedom as a living dynamic. We can talk about freedom as a knowing. We can talk about freedom as a willing. We can talk about freedom as a feeling. And it is all these things. Like, ultimately, in the most concrete sense, it includes everything, and like we have like the various conditions that accrue within us, and we are this pinnacle of the pyramid of reality, that little pinnacle from which the world fully looks back down upon itself and grasps everything that it is, including its own self as the pinnacle. And being that it has the kind of history that it has, that it is the kind of being that it is, there is a judgment, but there is no judgment of this was a mistake or this was good or bad. You go here, you go there. It's a mistake of it's not a mistake at all. It's just a complete grasp of this is my history. This is just the history of what I had to go through to get to this point of self-comprehension. And for Hegel, this is not a point just merely for us as individuals. It's a point for us as societies as well. And this whole thing, like in which, unlike other people, he's not Plato and says like, oh, well, structure society like this. He's not other people says like, oh, well, what you really need to do to be happy is this. His whole thing is radical freedom. You're left in the void of indeterminacy to literally make of yourself and your world whatever it is that you want it to be. Can you make mistakes? Yeah. Will you make mistakes? Absolutely. Is this a bug or a feature? It's a feature. And if it wasn't, he makes a damn good case. I would say it's a perfect case. I don't see any way anyone could argue against it if they comprehended it, really. That if it was any other way, we would all hate it.
Yeah, best of all possible worlds.
Yeah,
I think Hegel pulls that off.
Yeah, Hegel pulls off what Leibniz could not.
That thing you wish was true with all your heart, with the very fiber, if you really care. It actually is true. You couldn't ask for anything more.
And other people would probably be like, are probably going to hear this and go like, how can you say that? The children in Africa. That too is part of the growing pains of the kind of beings that we are. It's just like, when you're a kid, except this is society writ large. You're ignorant. You do a lot of stupid shit. You do a lot of horrible shit. I did horrible shit when I was a kid. There's plenty of times. I'm definitely not proud of certain things. But it is what it is, and when I look back, like, oh God, I wish I could have done something different. I can't even say that because, well, I couldn't have done anything different. I was ignorant, I didn't know. And you can talk about, like, well, maybe I did know. Well, I did know, it's like that's the ways in which, you kind of grow up and you're given morals and you're given these things to believe, but you don't actually know them. And so people are like, that was bad, but you don't actually know that was bad. It's in the same way that everybody knows addiction is bad, right? Everybody knows addiction is bad. The reality is, though, none of us actually know until you're in it. Only then, and you got to be in it to a certain point. Some people are in it and they never realize it while alive. Some people are in it, they go all the way down, and they're like, this is bad. And they gotta choose to crawl back out. Most of us just avoid it. So we know, but we know only formally. We don't really know in a concrete sense. And once you at least have the comprehension of this kind of thinking, you get to look at that and you say, like, yeah, I don't really know in a concrete sense. I can't really judge these people, because if I was in their shoes, I would be just like them. Likewise, if they were in my shoes, they were just like me. This really puts you in a perspective of like the utmost charity, the utmost sympathy and empathy, just through sheer reason alone. And that itself is, again, a freedom in which you don't feel the need to be judging other people. And if other people understood things the way you did, they also wouldn't feel the need to be judging you. There would actually be a level of mutual comprehension. Even in our differences, there's a mutual comprehension. Like, part of the wonderful thing about Hegel is Hegel allows real difference. Like, unlike everyone else, quite frankly, Hegel allows real difference. We can actually be different. You can have your own view of the world, and I have my view of the world, and we are particulars because we're particular human beings. We're individuals. We're different. So we'll never have this perfect alignment, and we don't have to. It's one of the great things about Hegel. We don't have to. It's completely irrational that we would have different perspectives. It's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, that's makes me think of tragedy and forgiveness, where it's like where two people both do the right thing, and it leads to terrible circumstances or consequences, or like maybe they have to fight or something. The point is if one can recognize the necessity on either side, that's forgiveness. That's accomplished forgiveness. If you know the necessity of either side, even though it produced something harsh, that you've forgiven it if you understood the necessity, because you would not will it otherwise, because it was necessary. And that's the thing, is that it would be truly terrifying if there was something that it was actually impossible for the good to come forth from. That would be something terrifying to be terrified of. So that evil things can happen, so to speak, is good, because it means that there is nowhere where good cannot come forth from, so to speak. And that is a consoling thought.
Yes, I'll give
evil
that to
could
that.
not absolutely assert itself. So
Yeah, evil definitely can never be absolute. It's impossible. To go back to the thing about forgiveness, you want a proof of free will? Forgiveness. That's it. If forgiveness is possible, free will must be real. And forgiveness is totally possible, therefore, no question, free will is actual. Why is that? Because forgiveness is a complete transcendence of all natural law. All natural law is a positiveness of a chain of unbreakable events. Forgiveness is the breaking of that chain. It doesn't matter what you did, it doesn't matter what has happened, it has been annulled. Like Hegel says, Hegel treats this almost as magical, if not literally as magical. He says, spirit literally changes the past itself through forgiveness. Because it doesn't make it as if it didn't happen. It basically is as good as it did not happen. When you truly forgive, it's the bad blood is gone. The cycle of vengeance is broken, because that which requires vengeance is no more.
Yeah, there's a woman who wrote a book. It was basically divinely inspired. I can't remember its name. I shared it recently on my Twitter, but what got her going in that was she had a job with another person, and it was awful. Like they were just at odds with each other, fighting and frustrated. And at one point, one of them said to the other, like, "How can we change this? How can we fix this? This is terrible. We have to fix this." And for her, the chain of deterministic necessity, or like what she calls causality, in her intuitive way, uh, was broken. Like that broke the causality of what was happening. The external determinacy of this, like a chain of events that you just have to carry out. Uh, and it inspired her, and she ended up writing this like mystical text that is like in many ways very Hegelian. And my intuition, reading the backstory and then reading the text, was that she, in the moment of forgiveness or just changing to try and mend the situation, that appeared spontaneously, almost like out of nowhere, was like a divine thing. Like that kind of insight inspired a whole mystical text. That's a very beautiful and wise.
Yeah, I mean, it literally has to be divine because forgiveness itself is divine. Like, forgiveness is not part of the natural order. It cannot be. It literally just breaks that logic. It's transcendental to it. To go back to the thing of the good, that there can be nothing from which a good could not arise. I mean, Hegel has that famous phrase that, what is it that, and this is actually an argument we had with Spirit Man, if you remember, about the whole thing that Hegel says, who are you to think that the good is resting upon your shoulders? That if you didn't do this, the good would never come. He says, the good isn't so weak as to need you for anything. Like the good is ever present. The good brings itself about. It's not you. It's not contingent upon you. It's not contingent upon us as individuals. Because good people are born every single day. Good things are happening. Even bad people do good things without intending to do good things. The good is just this force underlying everything. It's a slow moving progress of history in which all of these tragedies and terrible things born, and I agree with Socrates here that they're all born out of ignorance. That there's no way anybody could ever do evil knowingly. That they were conscious that they were doing evil. There's plenty of people do evil things unwittingly. But if you really knew the good, there's no way you could actually will to do evil.
And one way to think of this is that that bad things go badly is good. That's them abrogating themselves. Like they're annulling themselves by going badly. An example would be if we end up being so careless that we destroy the environment and we're not able to live on Earth anymore, like people die. It's good that we fucking perished because we weren't being good enough. Like, it's like the fingerprints of God are everywhere like that. Where it's like, it's good that bad things go badly. That's how that should be.
Yeah, like evil self-cancels, and it is good that evil self-cancels. Every like, it's like by Hegel's logic, everything begins as evil. It has to, it begins in abstraction, it begins as partedness, it's ignorant. And it will have to act, and then move and snake its way towards truth because it can't go in a direct line. The truth is not immediate. The truth is and is not immediately there. It is immediately there, but we're not conscious of it. Nothing's ever conscious of it. Ontologically, there's plenty of things that will never even reach a higher level of truth. Their truth is very minimal, like an atom of gold.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can think out like the logic of something, the reason of something that seems bad, and it will eventually show like a limit where it doesn't even make sense to do it. Where I was listening to a thing on a car ride recently, and they were discussing it was basically arms race with respect to biological weapons, like creating like viruses that could infect and harm, like kill people, and using them as a weapon of war. And that in these labs, what they have to do, or they do, is they create they have to create what they think will be used against them in order to develop things to fight back against them. And I was just thinking about like the logic of like biological warfare and creating like an ultra infectious thing that could kill like tons of people. It's like it wouldn't make sense to make one that was so effective that it found its way back to you. Like these things end up building limits into themselves where it just doesn't even make sense. Like it just caps itself out, and then it just demands to not be used because it couldn't even work for you, so to speak, if you were rational. Same with like environmental stuff. Like in order to like be able to be able to defend yourself in like a context where there's benefits short term for exploiting the environment in a way that's unsustainable, so that you can have enough of a military and economy to be able to defend yourself against somebody else who would be willing to do that. In the short term, or like eventually, a person who just keeps exploiting their own environment so intensely in order to, like a country that does this to aggress against others and to dominate them and things like that, they undo their own capacity to even do that because it's predicated on destroying the environment, which sustains their ability to even maintain them. And so it's like there's an automatic built-in balance point that if it can be sustained against like shit like that, where you have a population that is maxed out but sustainably. So it's like at the that's where you get the most out of your ability to defend yourself long term against aggressors or something like that, is that you use as much of your environment as you can to have as large a population and economy as you can, while also reproducing that environment so that you can keep doing that. And that is the most powerful long-term position to occupy. So even from like arms race or like the most cynical vantage points, there's stuff built in to make sure that like it just doesn't make sense to go too far.
Yeah. I mean, I think that fundamentally that just gets at like, the core of Hegel beyond freedom, which is contradiction. Freedom is a double-edged sword, and it cannot not be. Like there's no way to have freedom without the freedom to fuck up, without the freedom of royally fucking it up, of committing the most atrocious mistakes. It's built into it, In order for freedom to freely be free, it cannot be given. So you gotta fight for it. You gotta struggle for it. If you didn't struggle for it, it just wouldn't be free. So yeah, I think I'll make that point. Just reiterate this. Again. For those of you interested in this issue, I advise you to read Hegel. I know it's difficult. You may want to read some secondary literature. Sure, that's fine. But you're not going to get the most valuable things. The valuable things isn't the things that we're talking about, and I know Rain certainly experienced this himself. These aren't just beliefs we have. This isn't just like, oh, I believe this, and so and so believes that, and we struggled to literally grasp this, in the metaphorical grasp of the concept in German is Begriff, which has the German root of to grasp in it. A concept is the grasping of the fullness of reality. Freedom is the concept. Freedom is the grasping of itself in reality. The grasping of this stuff enframes you, not outside, but literally the way that you are enframed by your skeletal system and your muscles and all these things. It is the very being we have. If you grasp that, like this point of view, which is, it's hard to even call it a point of view because it's a point of view of all point of views. It's point of viewedness, in a way. It allows you to see the truth in everything. Hegel quite literally says this. He has that famous phrase. The novice student, loves to draw the distinctions and falsehoods of everything. Prove things wrong, and he says it's only the aged learner and teacher, master, who understands that the actual value of knowledge is to see the truth in everything. Rather than going around and judging the world and like, oh, we need to change this and that. It's not that things don't need to change. Certainly they need to change. And part of changing things is actually part of the process of the good. So, sometimes, you need a bit of a violent revolution. Well, that's what you need. Sometimes that's just the process of the good. So, it's not a do-nothing philosophy. Some people are like, oh, Hegel's just a quietist who just accepts reality. No, he doesn't. There are things you should do, but the thing is that what you should do is not given, and it never will be given. It's up to us, individually, collectively, to struggle for this project of realizing freedom, which is our project. Individuals have that project in their own lives. Communities have that project in their lives. Your local state, your local nation, whatever you want to call it. The globe, all these things are various projects of freedom under one gigantic global universal project of freedom, when it always has to be universal, because this kind of reason, since it allows you to integrate everything, also allows you to see the value of everything. It allows you to see the value of all this difference, in which the aim is not to destroy that difference. The aim isn't to destroy the Arabs. It isn't to destroy Islam. It isn't to destroy the Hindus. It isn't to destroy, their various different cultures and their values. None of that. In fact, I think that the greatest value you have is like you appreciate the differences, and you say, they have their views, we have our views, and it's not a like, oh well, they believe their stuff, I believe my stuff. We just indifferently let each other be, and just like, so long you stay in your lane, I'll stay in my lane. Don't bother me. No, it's not even that. It's even stronger than that. It's like, I appreciate your difference, and you appreciate my difference. It's like those good friends that don't agree on politics, and they debate heartily, and they yell at each other, and get all excited and things. But at the end of the day, it's all in good fun. It's like, there's no real anger behind it. There's no animosity. And despite the fact that we can't come to an agreement, nonetheless, we appreciate the difference. If that's not freedom, I don't know what is. That's all I can say about that. Beyond that, I think that we'll finish that here. This has been Antonio Wolf with my good friends here. See you around.